6, 2024 City Council Work Session Meeting. Our meetings are public and you're welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there is no public comment. Please join us on Tuesday, June 11th during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, by email at council.comments@slcgov.com, or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. We will now begin our work session. The first item on the agenda is the fiscal year 24-25 budget for Sustainability Department and Refuse Fund. Ben Ludke, Council Policy Analyst, will join us at the table, as will Debbie Lyons, Sustainability Department Director, Sophia Nicholas, Sustainability Deputy Director, and Chris Bell, Waste and Recycling Division Director.
Councilmember Dugan is online, right? Okay. Just double checking. The Sustainability Department's budget for fiscal year 2025 is proposed to be just over $26 million. This is a $2.2 million reduction compared to fiscal year 2024. It is an 8% decrease. Most of this decrease is caused by a reduction for capital expenditures in the Waste and Recycling Division. The last two annual budgets included a few $1 million for vehicle replacement funding. Those were reappropriations because the manufacturers were not accepting orders, but the vehicle replacements were still needed. Most of those vehicle orders have now been placed, and so the funding is not needed to be reappropriated for a third year, hence the reduction in capital expenditures. There are no new FTEs. The department's total staffing would remain at 65. The Sustainability Department has two divisions, the Waste and Recycling Division, which is 90% of the department's budget. The other division, the Environment and Energy Division, is 10% of the department's budget. The refuse collection fees are proposed to increase by 10%. This would result in $1.6 million in additional revenue from those fees. The increase is to cover higher operating expenses, as well as ensure that the Waste and Recycling Division's fund balance can get closer to sufficient levels. The expense projections over the next few years suggest that an additional increase of 10% is possible in fiscal year 2026 and again in fiscal year 2027, after which it would go down to about 3%. The fiscal year 2025 budget might be the last year for the Environment and Energy Division to use a mix of revenue sources. It has landfill dividends, a transfer of $1.2 million from the general fund, use of their cash reserves, their fund balance, and then a little bit of interest income. There has been a transition over the last few years for this division to increasingly rely upon the general fund. Next fiscal year, or 2 fiscal years from now, fiscal year 2026, if there is not landfill dividend and sufficient fund balance, if both of those revenue sources are unavailable, then the general fund transfer would need to double in order to provide support for the existing operations and programs. You may recall back in March, in Budget Amendment number 4, approving $230,000 one time for a pilot program expansion for air quality incentives focused on e-bike vouchers, as well as indoor air quality devices. That $230,000 is not proposed to be ongoing in the fiscal year 2025 annual budget because the program is launching this summer and will be operating over fiscal year 2025 with the funding from that budget amendment. Depending on the outcomes of the program, you could see that request return in the fiscal year 2026 budget. I want to point out an item in the non-departmental budget. It's $100,000 for environmental assessments and remediation. So it's not in the sustainability department budget, it's in non-departmental, but the sustainability department manages the consulting contracts that use that $100,000. It's available to any general fund department, and it's intended for emergencies and unexpected needs. In the additional info section of the staff report, this is page 5 and page 6, there are updates on several projects that were funded in recent years. These include the new Electron solar plant, which is helping the city meet its sustainability goals for renewable energy, the Utah Renewable Communities Initiative, the gas-powered lawnmower exchange program, creating a zero waste by 2040 plan, 2 studies about electrifying transportation. One of them is internal for the city's fleet, and the other is public facing for the community. And there's also an update on the community food equity assessment. Can we get attachment 4, the alignment chart displayed? I wanted to touch on last Thursday when the council held the Title II amendments briefing about changing city code for the sustainability department's core functions and focus areas. Staff created, we're calling this an alignment chart, to show where the department's ongoing program budgets advance the focus areas. So up at the top in red are the focus areas, and on the left in blue are the program budgets. And then the green, yellow boxes show where the budgets are advancing certain focus areas. And one important thing to note, the waste and recycling division, that $23.1 million includes personnel costs. The energy and environment divisions program budgets do not reflect personnel costs. And this is partly because some of their FTEs work across several different programs, so there wasn't an obvious, well, this one FTE can be allocated to this one program. Feedback is welcome if this is a helpful way to visualize your high-level policy focus areas with the program budgets in the division. We could organize this differently if you wanted it to be ranked from largest budget to smallest, or if you wanted it to be by focus area, who has the most support across programs to the least. This is our first attempt. It does include feedback from the department, but wanted to include this since you just had the Title II discussion last Thursday. That's it from me. I'll turn it over to Debbie and her team, who have a budget presentation.
Debbie, I just want to give you a warning. We're going to lose Councilmember Wharton for a hearing in about 9 minutes.
Okay.
We might have to pause while we wait to get one council member back.
Okay.
A heads up if I have to do that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for this opportunity to present our department's fiscal year 25 budget. Joining me are Sophia Nicholas, my deputy director, and Chris Bell, our director of waste and recycling division. And I also want to thank Angie Nelson, my finance manager, who put a lot of work into this year's budget. She's maybe joining us online, but she's traveling today. Just to orient us, I will talk about our budget and department in very broad terms, and then Sophia and Chris will get into a little bit more details on some of the insights and requests that we're making. Next slide. This is our org chart. As been mentioned, we have two divisions, the waste and recycling and then the environment and energy. One budget efficiency measure that we are evaluating, as he mentioned, we're not requesting any new full-time positions. So we're looking at some efficiencies and reallocation of some vacancies to meet some operational needs. Specifically, our two operations supervisors manage multiple programs and 23 to 25 individuals, which is a big workload. So we're looking at some equipment operator positions that we have had troubles filling and keeping full, and so reallocating those to help spread some of that supervisor workload and create a better balance. The E&E division, Environment and Energy division, develops long-term strategies basically for pollution reduction, and also works on supporting departments on best environmental practices. The E&E division has a fairly flat structure, with Sophia managing all the day-to-day work there, and she serves as the point of contact for all communications and engagement through the department as well, in addition to serving in her role as the deputy director. And that division also is supported by a couple of grant staff right now, full-time grant staff and part-time interns. Next slide. Our department is one enterprise fund, which means it's not part of the general fund. And while the top couple of boxes show a department-wide total for our revenue and expenses, we really do look at each division separately because they have different funding sources, revenue sources, as well as functions within those. And as Ben mentioned, overall we're proposing a budget that's nearly 8% lower than last year, mostly due to the fleet replacement, which Chris will talk about. A portion of the E&E division revenue comes from ongoing dividends that we receive as the joint owner of the landfill, and there were a couple of times in the past where and that was a really great position to be in. But currently, as Ben mentioned, most of the revenue is going to be coming from the general fund, or that's what we're requesting. And that's pretty much in line with how most cities fund their sustainability and climate efforts. As Ben mentioned, last year in our budget presentation, we anticipated that this year we would make a full transition of the E&E division into the general fund in '25, but we have enough cash reserves to delay that transition for one more year, so we're just requesting the same general fund transfer. The revenue stream from waste and recycling comes from user fees, and those are mostly from the residents that pay for garbage and recycling pickup. And then we also charge other departments for services as well as special events. Next slide. So there are two slides summarizing the key changes. The first slide shows the proposed changes to revenue. The E&E division we're expecting about $30,000 more from the landfill distribution, and then there's some miscellaneous interest revenue. Insights 2 and 3 on that slide are related to our weekly collection fee increase and the glass recycling program, the voluntary glass recycling program. And then the last item there is related to fleet, and Chris will talk about that. Next slide. This is a summary of all of our proposed expense insights. So the first two are related to the citywide proposal for personnel services and benefits. And you'll note that we do not have any expense insights for the E&E division. Chris will talk about most of those insights related to waste and recycling. I just want to point out a couple of them. Number 9, the fleet fuel, that we're projecting a slight decrease based on market conditions and what we expect to use for our fleet. Number 10, tipping fee increases. Those are related to landfill tipping fees that are planned, as well as fees that we pay to the recycling facility to sort recyclables. And number 11, the fleet maintenance budget, we're projecting a 10% increase in supporting the fleet budget. This is slightly lower than what fleet had projected for us, but we feel comfortable with a 10% increase. And then number 13, the operating and administrative, that is a straight 3% increase from last year's operating and administrative, and included in that is the glass recycling contract. There's a CPI adjustment that's allowed by contract there. And that also includes just miscellaneous supplies like safety supplies and things like that. Next slide. And I will turn it to Sophia for this one.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our budget. So because we're not requesting any new funding in our division this year, this is a pie chart just showing our program areas and what they cover, as well as how much is in our budget in E&E. So just going clockwise, administrative, a large portion of this comes just from the general overall administrative fees that are charged that we pay to the general fund. Happy to talk more about that. Air quality is our next biggest program budget. This includes the $250,000 for our landscaping equipment exchange program, as well as $214,000 for supporting EV installations. And then the rest is budget to support outreach and engagement and professional development. The climate budget is for consulting memberships and professional development. Energy efficiency is to support compliance and outreach related to our energy benchmarking ordinance, as well as just general outreach around that program. Food equity, this maintains the $50,000 food microgrant program, which was the same as was funded in fiscal year 24, plus some other outreach supplies and miscellaneous needs. And then our general outreach budget is for tabling and other kinds of community outreach we do. And then finally, our renewable energy budget includes the noticing costs for the Utah Renewable Communities Program, and just some specific communication support for that as well. So, pass it back.
Next slide, please. And then Chris will take it from here.
Okay, good afternoon, Council. It's good to be with you all, and thank you for the opportunity to present our budget. So, excuse me. As Debbie ran through our complete list of insights earlier, I want to focus on, excuse me, really the top three. So we're happy to provide detail on any of those previously listed, but we really want to focus on the most significant budget items, which outside of inflation are as follows. The first, in order of magnitude here, is our capital equipment replacement and both the revenue and expense impacts to that. Second is our requested increase to our service fees. And third, the allocation from public utilities to collect our residential service fees. Next slide, please. So again, in order of magnitude, this is our largest, financially speaking, for this year. However, big picture, our capital equipment request is essentially half of what it was last year, at just over $4.1 million. Thankfully, because supply chain conditions or constraints ease considerably, we were able to order all the equipment that we had budgeted in FY24, with the exception of 2 light-duty trucks that we have reappropriated in FY25. So the $4.1 million request this year consists of just over $2.6 million in equipment that we will finance, and I'll explain that briefly, and then almost $1.5 million in equipment that we pay cash for. And all of this is it's all replacement equipment. It is all on an average 6-year replacement schedule. So, and I'll touch on this in a graph later, but essentially the finance proceeds, the debt financing proceeds that we receive from this and the corresponding offset expense render this really budget neutral. So when we talk about operating and operating revenue and expenses in a later slide, we peel those out for a cleaner look. Then just a couple more details on this. We are projecting a slight increase in miscellaneous revenue for some additional used equipment sales. That is a slight $100,000 offset to that revenue piece. And then our lease debt payment reduction is just almost $31,000. That's simply a point in time, as I like to call it, because we have a revolving debt obligation for vehicles that are at some point in their 4-year financing cycle throughout their 6-year asset life. Next slide. So these are our proposed service fee increases included in the CFS. These represent a 10% increase requested across the board, with the exception of just a 3% increase that is due to a contractual obligation for our glass recycling service provider. So that is a 3% increase to the curbside glass recycling subscription service just for those subscribers.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Is that 10%, how is that measured for that increase?
Measured in?
I don't understand waste recycling, so I would like to understand, where does that 10% increase come from? Is that because there's an increase of service, or is that just something that we see in waste and recycling? Or?
So really, yeah, good question. So we are not proposing any increase or decrease in services. This is being driven by inflation and some other ongoing expenses that I will get to in more detail.
How did we land on 10% though?
I'm going to show you in the next slide.
Great, that's what I want to see.
Yep. So for the next, for most of our ratepayers that are on a 90-gallon garbage can, and let me just point out, our monthly service fee is all inclusive. So that includes all curbside, weekly curbside collection, and bulk pickup. So for most of our subscribers, that is a annual impact of $36 or $3 a month. And then the next slide, I will get to that question in better detail. Did I skip one? So this is the overview of our operating revenue and expense summary, again, with finance capital pulled out. And what we aim to do, this is a graph of current fiscal year as well as our 5-year outlook. And the operative lines in this graph are really our recommended cash reserve for our fund balance that finance recommends to us for a safe, resilient fund balance level, and then our ending cash balance relative to that line. So the yellow and the green lines there. This fee increase is the fourth step in a multi-year process to get back to a much smaller, more CPI-aligned fee increase that our residents clearly prefer. We started this in fiscal 22 after taking a pause since fiscal 15. So there's quite a gap there where at the time in fiscal 15, we had a healthy fund balance, and we had proposed and council chose to keep fees flat for 8 years. With the tide of current inflation and everything, it's taking longer to catch up now and get back over the curve to get back to a much smaller increase. Does that make sense? Okay, good, thank you. So our finance again recommends that we keep our fund balance at 18% of operating revenues, which is just over about 2 months worth of our operating expenses. This is a safe, resilient level in the face of any unforeseen emergencies or significant cash flow disruptions in order to continue operations. And we are projecting at the end of fiscal 25 that we will be at 12%. Even with this rate increase, we will be at 12%, about 6% below recommended. And I will get to a little more detail here in the next slides, but at this point we are thinking that our increases will need to be 10% in 26 and 27 before we can get back to a much smaller adjustment. But of course, we do reassess annually based on projected expenses. Next slide. So our last slide is our internal cost to public utilities for our public utility billing system. That increase this year is just under $900,000. Two pieces to that. The $219,000 represents a 17% increase over our current year budget, which is our annual ongoing internal service fee that they assess to us to bill and collect our user fees, our subscriber fees. The larger piece to that is $670,000, which is going to be an ongoing time-limited expense for fiscal 25, 26, and 27, which is our cost share allocation to help upgrade and replace the public utilities billing system that is currently at end of life. IMS is leading that effort to replace that system in the next 3 years. So that is our portion of that, which is approximately $2 million.
Sorry, I just have to jump in. I want to make waste and recycling kind of exciting today. My colleagues are so interested in this topic too. Is the billing system going to help us automate and reach more customers? I mean, what is this actually doing in function?
I would defer some of that to public utilities, but frankly, the pub system was handwritten, custom designed software that the city has had for decades. It is no longer even written in supportable code, so it is it is at end of life.
It's in C++, Python, something like that. I just want to raise a point, which is, and I'm really happy this is happening, but we have a lot of outstanding data that doesn't exist, cannot be interpreted in today's technological advancements, and this is something that's important to me. So, I mean, thanks to the administration for looking at this, but sincerely, we need to keep our eyes on this. I think so much outstanding software that's outdated. So I just want to make sure that this is a good investment. This is actually going to be helpful to us and integrate. Do you know if it integrates with any other software that the city currently utilizes?
I can add a little bit. From a budget amendment, the council approved $250,000 to hire a consultant to look at options for how to replace the public utilities billing system, or pubs. So last I heard, we're waiting to receive what those options are, and they're asking those kind of questions. Right. Is this something where we need to create, from scratch a whole new system, or are there off-the-shelf options, or something in between? Okay. And staff has this as an area to follow up with IMS on, since they're leading the effort.
Do you know if we'll get briefed on that before it's decided, or?
Good question.
I'd like to be briefed on it.
It will require additional budget, so it will be returning to the council at some point.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for those. And yeah, as a result of all of that, that is really the underlying additional costs and inflation that is driving our need to request 10% this year. That is all I have. Thank you.
Questions?
Council?
With the EV replacement. Sorry.
Sorry. Councilmember Dugan, after Councilmember
Dan,
Lopez Chavez, you can go. Sorry.
Sorry about that, Dan. You mentioned the EV replacements, and I wanted to know, is this just extension of current charging stations, or the charging stations that currently exist need some upgrades?
The 214,000. So that's to support new charging stations, and we're looking for and have been successful with some grants, and so sometimes this is for match for the grants that we receive. So we've already received this fiscal year grants through Rocky Mountain Power to support new charging stations, and then this is just a kind of a base budget that allows us to follow through on priorities identified for future charging station locations.
Would you mind walking me through how we identify that trend towards EV, from converting from a typical parking space to EV charging stations?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We'd love to go deeper into it through a study that we're just concluding as well, and we'll be providing a written briefing to council on that once it's done in a couple of months. But right now, we have a fleet of charging stations that was installed around the 2017 timeframe that was really just looking at where do we have parking spots within the city, where do we have electrical conduit, so basically the lowest hanging fruit, where do we have density in the city, so we've concentrated some of them in kind of the downtown area, and since then have built out to the extent possible just where those infrastructure makes it easy and possible. So going forward, we are looking at, we've been coordinating with parks on city parks, the Glendale Regional Park, where there are new parking lots going in that the city owns, and is there an opportunity for charging there? Libraries, so we also have some new stations going in libraries that are coming online in the next couple months. And then anytime there's a major road construction project, we're talking with transportation and engineering to see if it makes sense to install charging stations through those projects, so we're not tearing up the pavement more than once.
For staff, just a note, does FOF funds help us with this at all, or no?
I'm not thinking of one of the 5 critical needs that would clearly fall into this. That being said,
Mary Beth shaking her head.
yeah,
back
that
there.
being said, critical needs are not set in law. It is a policy decision by the council. It has evolved over the years since it was instituted back in 2018. So if that's something the council wants to revisit in a budget discussion, you could.
Councilmember Dugan? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
One other thing I'll just note on that one, those funds have also been used to replace aging EV stations. So part of our first fleet of EV stations that we installed, some of them are breaking, so we use that to replace those.
Councilmember Dugan?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I appreciate that. And my question is on the electron solar farm that was just went up and is running, and the net metering and the price of the solar. Is it 1-for-1? Is it 100%, or is it how are we paying for that, or what's the rebate from Rocky Mountain Power on the power that we're producing for ourselves?
It's a good question. It's within the regular budgeting that the city departments, whether it's general fund, airport, or public utilities, already is budgeting for electricity. So we're currently talking with Rocky Mountain Power about finalizing exactly how all of the invoicing happens. Of course, it's not as easy as we'd like it to be, but it is within what the city is already budgeting for electricity. So we're not receiving any. It's not a net metering schedule, so we're not receiving payments from Rocky Mountain Power for that.
And we're not
project.
receiving, and so we're not also receiving a payback, because I get 100%, because my solar panels in my house are 100% net metered, so I get a 1-for-1, because my solar panels produce energy at kilowatt, and I get a kilowatt of payback. That's not the way that it works with a bigger farm like this.
We've committed to, as a city, to purchasing a certain amount of the output of the solar farm on an annual basis. And that was a calculation that Christopher Thomas on our team led with, in conjunction with public utilities and airport and the general fund departments, looking at what we've used in the past and then projecting out through increased electricity needs going into the future. So we've made a minimum commitment, and it'll be approximately half of the output of that solar farm. I don't know if that answers your question, but
The city did not fund, or the partners did not fund that project. It was funded privately, and so that's kind of the difference between a self-funded solar project versus one that's financed through the utility and a developer.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. But I also just want to shout out to the department for pushing that one through and getting that farm up and running, because it's hitting our goals sooner than we thought. So very nice work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask, on the E&E side, this revenue is mostly grant related, right?
The revenue for the division as a whole.
Just for that division. I understand that the waste and recycling is mostly fees, but on E&E, is it mostly grants?
No, the grants are not reflected in that. It's mostly landfill dividends. So there's a landfill dividend of $480,000 that we're projecting next year. And then the other portion, we're reflecting the general fund transfer. So that's about $1.2 million.
So any grants aren't included in here, they're supplemental?
No, grants are separate.
Okay.
I think maybe what we need to do, and it just doesn't relate particularly to your department, but work with the administration to get some consistency on when we receive charts from the departments. Do they include the personnel costs or do they include the grants, or, you know, those sorts of things, because we have a little bit of a variety in what's presented, and that's getting a little confusing.
Yeah, that's definitely, but I also know, like, from some of the work I'm doing in the private sector, that whereas like the early narrative about clean energies was that we have to subsidize them in order for them to compete with fossil fuels, the demand has switched and the social conscience has switched. And so we're getting to a place where there's parity, if not a greater willingness and demand for the clean. And so I'm just wondering if there are ways for us to push and be innovative and look forward so that you have independent revenue streams that are independent of our property tax holders. You know that we have fees for everything. Like we just have to have water infrastructure. I can't apologize. I can empathize, and I'm feeling the fear about that. But like with all of that going up, I just would love it if we started being innovative together, because I think the work is amazing and necessary. But if we can capitalize on kind of this momentum with the switch for the demand going in favor of the renewables, the cleans, you know, and find a way to give you all more security to do what you know how to do so well, that's something I'm deeply interested in.
Yeah, we're very involved in energy policy at a larger level to ensure that the benefits, the financial benefits from clean energy, are realized in rate structures at the utility, and that's a lot of the work of the Utah Renewable Communities Program, is
Awesome.
making sure we're
Thank
capitalizing
you. Thank you
on
for
that
taking the lead
benefit.
on that for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there are some really exciting federal opportunities right now that we're looking at with funding, so
Great.
we'll be in touch.
I was going to highlight the same thing. You may remember those applications to the EPA for the $4.6 billion of one-time nationally competitive money, and the Utah Renewable Communities Project had the largest of the city's applications. It was almost $48 million. So hopefully we'll find out this summer or fall about those.
Wonderful. Council, we good? Thank you all, and most of all, thank
Yeah,
you all
thank
for
you so
helping
much.
us make up our time deficit without compromising on quality. You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
With that, Council, we will turn our attention to the Department of Economic Development. Lorena Rifo Jensen is joining us online, and Jake Maxwell, the Deputy Director for Economic Development, is here in person.
Good afternoon to all of you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you, and especially to my team. I hope you can hear me, and I've lost my voice a little. I want to thank the mayor, the budget committee, council members, and council staff for this opportunity to come before to request our Department of Economic Development's budget this year. I need to express also, I would be remiss not to express my gratitude to our team, who really are the passionate warriors out there working with our local businesses, our community, and also making sure we establish great diplomacy with our sister cities program. Everything we do is to support our residents, our art businesses, organizations, local businesses, and build an international relationship through the Sister City program. Our goal is to create economic opportunities for Salt Lakers. Is that human touch. We only exist to ensure we're supporting our residents and to create those opportunities. And we do this, and I'll just mention a few, is through EDLF, construction grants, as you have been so generous to fund for the impacted business districts. And furthermore, I just want to say also, some of the programs that are done by the Arts Council through their programming and also their grants program and workforce development that we're partnering with our friends at the Salt Lake School District, and the Salt Lake Education Foundation. And Sylvia, I just saw your face and I realized I just jumped in. How rude of me. So I'll be quiet for now and let you do your part. I'm so sorry.
Please continue, Lorena.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, as our council chair mentioned, Jake Maxwell, and also we have our division directors on site to answer some questions. If we can go to the next slide for our budget, I would really appreciate it. So we come before you. This is just an idea what our team looks like, and you know many of them as you have joined many of our visits to different businesses. You participated with the school district and some of our workforce initiatives. With that, if we could go to the next slide. So here is our overview, basically of our budget, what we're asking. And I believe Jake will be clarifying in more detail, but we're asking for a one part-time person to ensure that we can be responsive to all the requests that are coming in from the Sister City program. And as Salt Lake City is highlighting and internationally through our Olympics, which announcement will take place on July 24th, we definitely have felt the need to have someone that supports us to ensure that we're doing it well and we're doing it right. For the next slide, please. Here you will see basically Sister City is a part-time position. Construction mitigation, we're asking just 100,000 because we already have the budget that you so kindly gave us last year to further support our business community. Main Street Promenade, thank you for your support on that. And right now, what the last missing part for economic development is we really need to do our economic analysis. And actually, I really want to express my appreciation because I think it was Councilmember Mano who brought up the importance, and Councilmember Pui, to have an economic analysis. So we appreciate the feedback through our small meetings with you. Then we have the Arts Council, which will be an increase of 200. We're finding that our partners for our programming, they're experiencing inflation. And because of that, the costs have gone up for them, and we want to ensure that we are keeping up with their costs and make sure that they're successful, because if they're successful, we are as well. Open Street, I'm sure there'll be many questions about this. We're asking for establishing a program, 400,000 ongoing. And then the Sister City budget has not been increased, as far as we know, for the last 15 years. So we're only asking for an additional $10,000. The reason why we're asking for just, very few items is because we're in the process of finalizing our strategic plan. And we want to make sure that when we come to the table with program requests, we do it with a strategy behind. So I just want to make sure you understand why we don't have more things being asked in our budget. Next slide, please. And here, this is I love this photo because it's a celebration of the work that we can do together. And this is Matsumoto last year during the Pioneer Day, July 24, and it took everyone to support this, administration, council staff, council members, and I think we were a really good host. So really appreciate the support when it comes to this. Next slide, please. With that, I've described to you basically our Sister City request. It has been highlighted. Right now our budget is 10,000, and most of that 6,000 goes to 2 memberships that we basically pay for, which is the Sister City International and the World Union Olympic Cities. And as you can see, the World Union Olympic City is a great entity because of their expertise, and you can learn from the other partners how they have been able to be successful when hosting the Olympic Games. So I think this is very beneficial to us. And then, of course, we have our request of a part-time person. The cost of that is $47,000. So the total ask is $77,000 for the Sister City Diplomacy Program. With that, if we can go to the next slide, I would really appreciate it. And I don't need to say anything about our iconic public art that everyone loves in our city. And I think there's going to be more coming to our west side, which we're really excited about. So with that, I will turn in the time to Jake.
Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Jake Maxwell, the Deputy Director for the Department of Economic Development, and I'm happy to be here to talk about the Arts Council a bit. This is for a $200,000 request in the non-departmental that goes to the Arts Council. In short, this is a request that covers two major areas. A little more than half of this is to increase the city arts grants fund. First, we want to announce that there is a plan to include a new allowable use within our city arts grants for murals. And as you can see in this graph, the bottom line is the level of increase we've seen over the past 10 years. It's a little over 16%. But the top line is the amount of demand for this program. Right now, we're seeing about 158% above what we have allowable funds for. We also know that artists and arts organizations are seeing up to 30% of inflation. So this request is to help us somewhat keep pace with those needs. The second major item is $80,000 to increase contract amounts for our ability to deliver some of our core programs, including Twilight, Living Traditions, Busker Fest, and so on, the Finch Lane Gallery. These costs include things like security, fencing, porta potties, our financial audit, concession fees, cash handling services, etc. So that's what that amount is for. And then there's a small $2,500 amount to address some of our uncontrollable increases for utilities at the art barn. A few other considerations we wanted to mention too here is that the Arts Council experienced a $45,000 funding gap last year to deliver our programs. ZAP grant funds have steadily been decreasing to the tune of $193,000 since fiscal year 18, and 22% increase in attendance. So we feel that our programs work, and our attendance numbers are proving that. Next slide. Okay, this is a photo of our Fun Open Streets program, and with that, I'll hand this over to Lorena.
Thank you, Jake. As you can see, this is what happens downtown. People enjoying themselves. So if we could go to the next slide, I would appreciate it. Again, Open Streets, establishing a program. We have heard from the community. We know by looking at the numbers that are provided to us by our finance department that does such a great job, that this really increases our sales tax opportunities. And also what we've seen in the last year as many commercial and business districts, they're wanting to have some events. We were last night at the Shore House Community Council, and the chair of the chamber there asked me if there were going to be opportunities. I told them we don't know yet. We hope so. But I think several business districts are asking for this. So we requested $400,000 to support our several business districts within our city. As I described earlier, we are asking for $115,000 for an economic impact study to ensure that as an investment is made into our pedestrian mall downtown, we can provide the information that is being asked of us, which is, what will this do to property owners? How much could potentially the sales tax? So I think this is definitely a sound decision, just because we want to make sure that we know what to expect and we can share that with our businesses and other stakeholders. And then, of course, we're asking for an additional construction mitigation. This was a conversation many of us had last night at the Sugar House Community Council. They told us that it does help. I don't think it solves all the problems, but it's definitely a way to basically minimize some of this, some of the things that our businesses are going through by letting their clients know how they can get to them. So with that, let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, so you can see in this table, the first three requests are within our department, amounting to $262,000. And then the last three are non-departmental that Mary Beth presented on last week. And with that, we'll take questions.
Council? I'd like to talk about the $400,000 ongoing for Open Streets. generally I really like this, but we've said repeatedly that we want to have a policy discussion. I would feel much more comfortable if we put this into a holding count pending the policy discussion that allowed us to really flesh out what we expect out of the program so that we can approximate success. I think the expense is completely worthy, but I do want to make sure that we actually prioritize that conversation and don't just keep saying it's what we intend to do. I don't know how other council people feel about that.
Yeah, I've got some questions and concern to it, and thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to hear from economic development to see if they were planning in the next fiscal year to use open streets in other places outside of the downtown. I mean, the description very clearly was in response to COVID in the downtown, but I want to make sure that that's the intent.
I think it's a really good question, and I think Roberta can also come to the table. We've actually started putting together a program. We know that it works downtown, and we are looking forward to working with our partners in the downtown corridor. But like I mentioned, what we've seen in other cities as well is that they have open streets in different business districts. And often those communities come together side by side, the respective city, and they ensure that they're involved, they're engaged, and that's the type of programming. Like I said, last night was Stewart House, and then we've, of course, are planning to do a project in Granary as well, mid-August through mid-September. Roberta, do you have something to add to ensure we are responsive to Councilmember Lopez Chavez's question?
Sure, yeah. You're right. We did pilot open streets in 2020 as a response to COVID, but simultaneously, this was our opportunity to pilot closing down Main Street. So while we were supporting the business communities, we also thought if we're ever going to see what the closure of Main Street looks like, let's use this as an opportunity. And so, there's multiple reasons, and while also not just bringing economic returns to Main Street itself, really was to bring people back downtown. And so the reason why we're requesting that we want to host this in other neighborhoods is because, as Lorena mentioned, other districts want that same opportunity. In the Granary, we're going to have the opportunity to pilot different street concept designs as well, while also bringing economic activity to the Granary district. Other business districts are sort of primed for this as well. It's a much smaller scaled version, I would say. Downtown will always have downtown, and we'll have, the grand event down along from 400 South to South Temple, should we get to continue this. But within the neighborhood models, it'll be a smaller scale and very unique sort of to the activation, the unique characteristics of those communities. So we think we can bring sort of this economic activity to other parts of the city.
And thank you for that explanation. And to be clear, you're planning on exercising this program next year in the other neighborhoods then?
Yeah, we'd like to preserve some of the money for downtown and some of it to the other business districts.
I'd love to my colleagues, I'd love for this to be held also. I think we need to have a policy discussion here because I really appreciate this. I think even a study could be something we consider in terms of what does creating this type of open streets programming in other business districts look like when we know there's business districts that may exist in the future that are not currently activated, just to give us a good holistic view, because $400,000 barely is enough on Main Street itself. Just something I want to put on the record that the business community on Main Street is still recovering from COVID and feeling those inflationary costs as well as other neighborhoods, but with so much attention on the downtown, I'd be remiss not to advocate on their behalf. They really want to see this type of programming and have expectations as far as recurring revenue that we've spoken about. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I do think there's a much larger conversation here that I want to see soon.
Council?
Man, we are so excited today.
Can I ask a question about the shortfall in the Arts Council last year, the 45,000? How was that covered? What?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me now? So as you know, our sector was hardest hit among the pandemic, and we didn't have a non-departmental increase last year. Something that I'm really proud of is we do have a rainy day fund now at the Arts Council, but as you know, it's not best practice to use that for ongoing costs, and much of the inflation that we're seeing is over 30% in all of our production costs for programs, and so we dipped into that emergency fund to cover that shortfall.
So the emergency fund did cover that for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask though, just to follow up on that, is that a general fund allocation or is it from the nonprofit?
It's in the nonprofit.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's from earned revenue of the programs.
And then can I ask on the 193,000, is that cumulative since 2018, or is that an ongoing functional deficit from ZAP since 2018?
So the reason that occurs is because we used to do the Twilight Concert Series in-house. It's based on qualifying expenditures, and so this is actually our first year where we're going to stabilize, which is really exciting, but we're still feeling that drop because it's a 3-year average. So that is cumulative.
Okay, so it's it was like 50,000 one year and 45 the next. It wasn't that 1 year you lost 193 and we've been functioning $200,000 below essentially.
Can I check that slide actually? I do want to check if that was the, do you mind going back to the Arts Council slide? I just want to clarify that really quickly. I'm trying to recall, I'm not sure from memory. Since FY18.
So it's cumulative over
Yes,
years.
thanks.
I do want to thank you for your leadership in making sure the arts community is rationally represented in all the ongoing negotiations. You've been so pivotal. So thank you for being a voice of reason and a conduit.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't pay you for that part.
It's my favorite part.
And thanks, I did catch in the budget some funding towards Art Barn, which is really exciting.
For utilities.
Sorry, for the utilities. Still.
But it is part
I read Art Barn and I was like, I'm so excited for that.
I mean, it is exciting, and we're going to go again for a CIP application in the future.
Yeah, if you haven't gone on a gallery stroll, it's a great place to have a date or wine night, so I really have appreciated that.
And we're very grateful right now. We're getting a new roof, so it's being well cared for.
Council, any additional questions? All right. I think we're letting you off the hot seat. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're trending about 20 minutes early. So do we have everyone we need for governmental immunity here? We do. All right. So we're going to move on to governmental immunity. We're going to bring Jen Bruno, Council Deputy Director, to the table. And then is Lori here?
I wasn't positive that she was going to come to the table, but she absolutely came.
We have Lori Roberts, our risk manager.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'll just do a brief overview since there's not a formal slide presentation for this fund, but I think it's good to talk about it's for the council and public to get an understanding. The city is a self-insured the city is self-insured, which means that we don't buy excess liability, or we don't buy liability insurance that's like a traditional liability insurance. We do go to the private market for excess liability insurance. This is the fund that pays for anything from sidewalk settlements to officer-involved critical incident settlements. And you'll see there's several attachments that show the types of claims that are paid out of this fund, as well as the process that the city goes through to evaluate whether claims should be paid. From a budgetary perspective, the fund is about $4 million for fiscal year 25. The increases relate to the 10 FTEs that are assigned to this fund and the salary increases that are related to those FTEs. Those FTEs are technically within the attorney's office. So I think that's something important to know. The other interesting thing about this fund is that in fiscal year 23, it was shifted from a fund that was a general fund transfer. So each year the general fund transferred whatever amount was necessary to cover those claims to a standalone property tax. So this is a standalone property tax that's charged to every property owner in the city to fund these claims. The amount can be set by the council. So the amount that's set right now is set so that the fund can build up a fund balance, which will hopefully allow the city to pay any large claim or large settlement without needing to increase property taxes specifically to pay that claim. And this is just a function of state law. State law allows cities to establish a separate property tax line item to pay for governmental claims. So with that, I guess I will turn it over to council questions, or if you had anything to add. Okay.
Council? Is Councilmember Dugan on? I can't see if he's got a question. Okay, no hands raised.
It's a very exciting budget, so I get it.
Do you see me over here? I'm trembling.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it feels pretty self-explanatory and straightforward. And
okay.
Yeah. No one?
Great.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at this point, we had planned to take a 20-minute break. Let's do that. We'll still be ahead of schedule. So let's come back at 2:35, and then we'll pick up. We're going to swap on the agenda a little bit. We're going to move. Wait, is it okay for me to do this? Because we had said a time. Is it okay for me to move it up? Okay. Then we'll come back at 2:35, and we will start with unresolved issues, and then we'll follow that up by CIP. With us being this far ahead, we're good? Okay. All right, thank you. on now to the unresolved issues follow-up. We've got Jen Bruno and Ben Lidke at the table to help us walk through this. Jen, the time is yours.
Oops. Thank you, Madam Chair. To start, I just want to orient you guys to the spreadsheet that I've placed at your places, and I'll bring that up on the screen here shortly. All of the straw polls that you took on Tuesday are reflected in that spreadsheet, along with some new information we received about the actual amount for the judgment levy being slightly lower than the amount included in the mayor's recommended budget. So that is why you see on line 6, there's a negative 93,000 there. And what that means is that it's essentially like a revenue loss that you need to make up somehow. But I've just added it to all of the other straw polls you guys have taken. And so that's why you'll see that top number, that negative 783. On the top there is your balancing number. And let me just find the screen to share. Sorry. For some reason, my screen share is not wanting to cooperate. Councilmember Mono, I see you there. I emailed this version of the spreadsheet to the full council at about 1 o'clock today. So if you want to pull it up on your computer, you can follow along there too. Okay, so in green are notes of your discussions and straw polls. The straw polls are reflected in the columns, and then any new information we've included in blue. So maybe I'll go down and stop at each item where there's either a yellow highlight, which represents something that you talked about straw polling but did not straw poll, or where there's blue. So the first item, oh, and I should mention, we are still waiting for numbers from the state about final property tax numbers. We hope to get those on Monday. Once we get those, we'll know if you need to balance your budget by using fund balance or if you can use some of those funds to balance. So starting on line 19, the council had a brief discussion about putting in a placeholder for matching funds for the Jordan River safety team, a public safety team, that the administration is applying for a grant. Some council members were interested in maybe using some of the funds that we may or may not get from the state in terms of property tax numbers to have that be essentially a holding account until we find out if we get that grant. I don't know if the council wants to straw poll that now or if that should be the thing we come to at the very end once we know the final property tax numbers.
Council? Councilmember Lopez Chavez is in favor of waiting until we have tax numbers.
Can I ask a question? Good. Jennifer, how does that work if we're trying not to make budget changes? How is it that we can adjust that on Tuesday?
So I think it would be adjusting the on Tuesday, if all we're adjusting is the amount from fund balance or the amount of property tax. So essentially those two line items.
Okay. Then
it's
that
possible.
Can be done. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I think I guess maybe a more clear way to say it is staff will need to know if you are interested in having a holding account today so that we can add that to the key changes document today. Once we know the exact amount, then we can change that amount, but in order to have the documents set up to succeed, it would help to know today if you're interested in even having it. If you're not interested in having it, that also helps to know. Okay. Thanks, Cindy, sorry.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
So I think, certainly this is a commitment not only that we have made to the community in public. So I feel very strongly about this. This is one of those things that we have talked and the administration talked about it and we really committed to this. So I feel strongly about, and just in the hierarchy of things, at least having the holding account until we find out how much money we have available. But ultimately, it's going to come out to us to fund it one way or another. So if it's a conflicting point amount, considering the reduction of revenue. I will consider reducing that or just keeping the holding account open for us to decide later. But the decision we'll have to make it at some point, now or later, and we already told the community we're going to do it. So I think that we have already sort of committed ourselves to some answers there. But that's my piece there.
And based on the funding our future categories, you could put your holding account from funding our future fund balance, and then that way it's not necessarily contingent on general fund property tax coming in. It's just a placeholder amount. The administration noted that they are requesting a year one waiver of the match requirement, so it's possible that these funds won't be needed in year one, although we've usually seen that waiver is granted for personnel, but not always for equipment. So you may still have to fund equipment.
Could we put half of the money from, like half
a million?
500, half a million from funding our future in the holding account, pending the conversation from numbers, and we also reassess,
Yep.
Is that something that
I'm fine with that.
Great.
Councilmember
Councilmember
Mono
Mono
has his hand raised.
Councilmember Mono, we can't hear you in the room. I don't know if people in the Zoom can hear you.
How about now?
That's better.
Okay, I think I'm following the conversation and I'm in agreement with, I think, the direction we're going. I would be okay allocating this. For me, it is one of those things that pending where our final numbers come in. Because if we're in a hole, this would probably be higher on my list to remove if we're trying to balance the budget. If they come in the wrong direction. But if we're saying, let's go 500,000 from funding our future and just leave it at that for now, in my mind, this is showing a commitment to making sure that this team is implemented. Though it seems like the number, there's so many variables that determine the number. So I guess I like that direction of cutting it down to 500,000, putting it in there, and then we can come back to that later to see what's actually needed. Do we get the grant? Do we get the year one waiver, et cetera?
Great.
So should I ask for a straw poll?
That would be helpful.
To allocate $500,000 in holding account from funding our future for line 19, which is the John River team.
Councilmember Mono's thumb is up.
And Councilmember Dugan is still waiting. Okay, we don't have him. All right, so the straw poll is 5 affirmative with Dugan and Young absent.
Awesome. The next line that has new information is line 23. Transportation provided us some clarifying information on the 20 is Plenty campaign. All of the incorrect signage that existed previously in the city has been replaced. So any additional funding that the council would give would be to add signage in what they call key areas, so around schools, things like that. And they anticipate that it would be that the 20,000 straw pulled by the council on Tuesday would be enough for about 100 new signs.
One of the council members did point out that there is at least one sign out there that is incorrect. So this could be to fix any stragglers as well.
The administration did respond that there was not many,
Yeah, they had given us a lot of information. I just misunderstood, thinking that they were saying they didn't have all of them done. But they were saying they did have all of them done. It was 500 and something, but they have missed at least one, and they could use more signage near schools and such, so.
So unless the council's interested in reconsidering that item, we can move on and leave that funding there, or if whatever the council is interested in.
Yeah, once I saw that email, I responded back to staff. I still think it's something that could be utilized, especially near schools. I could show you, I had my council staff outline how many signage requests I've seen in particular in my neighborhoods. I still think there's some difficulty with wayfinding and signage that we could post. But if there's, obviously currently we see that deficit that we have to make up. So if we have to cut it, so be it. But
I would be okay supporting it. Could we do a little language direction there that is for replacing missing signs on school related?
Or near the perimeter of a school.
So we're priority to schools. I don't know if that's something that you guys are amicable to it and gives them direction. And if they don't spend all the money, then they can tell us.
Yeah, I'm absolutely amenable. I think that's great. Thanks.
We'll make that clarification. The next, go down to line 34. This was just a placeholder in the event that in the union negotiations that the council needed to add more money from in order to settle those agreements. We've since heard from finance that we do not need to add any money, so that's great, and we can skip that line. The next item, staff has clarified that some of the water assist funding, so this is that program that helps low-income residents with their water bills, is not fully utilized, and really only uses about $15,000 to $20,000 per year. So if the council was looking for $50,000 here and there is probably on a one-time basis $50,000 that you could recapture from that line item. Really, it would just be to help balance the budget. You could go to public utilities and ask them if they have ideas of how to make that program more widely available or widely used. I think it's an indicator when you have several years of data showing that you don't fully utilize the budget, that it's not being, maybe that there are improvements that can be made to the implementation of it, or maybe that the usage just isn't needed. So
I worry about with inflationary pressures that we know are happening this year. I would rather leave a little extra there and see what the new normal is at the new rates before we take anything from there.
Great. I see Councilmember Mono has his hand. Sorry, Councilmember Pui.
Councilmember Mono?
Oh yeah, thanks. I agree with you on that. I don't want to take any money away from water assist. And if anything, I'd like to put some additional funding, or even just ask the administration to do a little bit more within their existing funding to do outreach for that program, especially as we continue to raise water rates. We know we have to do that. We don't want, as we've all said, a Flint, Michigan situation where we have failing water infrastructure, but that does come at a cost. And I think that this program is going to be more needed. And I just don't, I don't think that people know about it as much. So that's kind of on us as council members to let our constituents know, but I think if we can put more funding to that or more effort to that to try and get those funds spent down, I think that will help the people that for whom the water rate increases truly do affect.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, I agree. I wonder if the follow-up question to that is how do we make sure that people know about it, and what do we need to do to improve the communication about this? So
Great.
I would love to support this program to be successful.
Can we earmark a certain portion of that to be used for communications to make sure people know it's available?
I think we could clarify with public utilities that funding is a pool to help itself be more utilized. So I think staff will follow up with public utilities to make sure that they know that they're empowered to do that. Let's see. I did skip over one item that I just wanted to make sure you understood, that the council understood. The Livable Streets Initiative is funded for as per the council straw poll, is funded in the amount of $2 million. But the reason it does not appear on either of these columns is that it's proposed to be funded out of the quarter-cent county transportation option, which has built up a little bit of a fund balance, and there's plenty to cover that. So that is covered in there. It's just under a different fund. The next item that you haven't straw polled yet that you talked about wanting to revisit are all of the new FTEs. So that's starting on line 43. And I believe previously Councilmember Pui had suggested kind of straw polling them in a batch, but I didn't know what the preference of the council was today.
I guess I would love to frame it that way, and if you have any ones that you want to pull, we can straw poll the rest, and at least that will help our administration, our council, to start moving ahead on the budget. So if you are hang up on some of those.
Councilmember Lopez Chavez, do you have any resolution on the questions that you had? I agree with you on we need a firmer understanding of the efficiency of things that we're investing money on. So I don't know what that looks like on the communications position that we were talking about.
Well, I can respond to that. I had a great conversation with Blake Thomas from Community and Neighborhoods, and I think, I just wanted to bring attention more so to the consolidation of these type of FTEs as we look to communicate towards residents. Again, I think if we go any certain day to speak to our residents, they don't have more information to their avail in the way they need to digest it. So I just want to, I think that's something I'd love to see and to be briefed on, is how we disseminate information. What is the need for each department? My understanding is funding a manager will always lead to more capacity and finding more information that could be disseminated. But if the goal is to have a resident better understand and digest that information, perhaps this is not the right way to invest in it. So
interesting.
Any other?
Councilmember Romano, were you going to say something earlier?
Yeah, I'm supportive of the straw poll that Councilmember Puey's suggesting to sort of do these all in one.
Councilmember Wharton?
I don't think that's a thing I want to figure out in this budget at this time, but at some point I think it's worth us going through all of the communication positions in the city and making sure that people are utilized to their full extent and that we're not duplicating services that could be centralized.
Could we turn it up for Darren, by the way?
We can't quite hear.
I think what Councilmember Mono in the room, it was a little soft. I think I'm just going to try to recap what I think you were saying, which is requesting a future conversation about all communications positions in the city and how those are utilized. Is that essentially what you were asking for?
Yes, I think I'll try and speak louder.
Sorry. Thanks.
Yes, I'm interested in that conversation. I guess the point of my comment was more that I'm not necessarily at a place where I want to remove any of these positions now at this point in the budget. So if we want to have that conversation, I prefer that we just do it later and look at it more holistically than these specific positions right now. So I'm supportive of going forward with all of these as proposed, which is I think what Councilmember Puey was
And
proposing.
if that comment was confusing, I, after speaking with the department head, am supportive of that particular FTE, but I do want to have a future conversation about communications in the city. I still have qualms around line 51, so I would say if we could do a straw poll for all, except for line 51, that would be helpful for me.
Councilmember Wharton, did you have something else to say?
No, I was going to ask about that one as well, because I missed the first part of the economic development briefing, so I didn't know if they had spoken about that.
They did briefly. They discussed how they view it as, and I'm trying to summarize how they said it, so I'm probably not saying it as accurately, but that it's important for the growth of their program, especially in the run-up to the Olympics.
Personally, go ahead, Derek.
I'm fine with us straw polling that separately. I am going to be supportive of this position because I feel like the Sister Cities program is an underutilized resource and something that I am interested in investing more in, just in general. So I will be supportive of this, but I'm fine to straw poll that separately if council members would prefer to do that.
Thanks.
Could I suggest a straw poll? Line 44 to line 76, removing from that straw poll line 48 and line 51. Line 48 being the communications and engagement manager and the Sister City part-time position. And the straw poll is to support those new positions. Okay.
That's side in the affirmative with Dugan and Young absent. Let's move on to line 48.
Yes, straw poll to support communications and engagement manager, line 48.
Looks like we're
That's
all
5 in the
row.
affirmative with Dugan and Young absent.
A straw poll to support line 51, Sister City part-time position.
I'm gonna support it too, but I want to know more about some more details, and I apologize that I wasn't here for that full briefing, so I wasn't able to get that information, but since it is just moving from a half-time to a full-time, I can support that.
So that's 4 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, 2 absent.
Yes.
And that concludes the job straw polls, correct?
Madam Chair, may I suggest one more thing related to the communications thing? I think maybe, should we straw poll that? I mean, just maybe some framework for future conversation about how the city communicates, and then we...
I think the optimization of the communication is...
Is there any appetite from this body? I know that...
As a legislative intent, or...
It's a legislative intent.
Yeah, we could do that.
I think the administration has heard your comments previously and has actually mentioned that they're looking at that. I don't know if we could just informally ask them if they were thinking of doing a briefing. The kinds of conversations we're having, it seems like that's a
I'm okay doing that.
Rachel voted thumbs up.
Can we expect that in the near future?
I'm okay doing that. Let's put a pin on it. Certainly we have questions, and I would love to give the chance.
I appreciate you bringing it up. Super important to me, and I think our colleagues see that and hear that, right? And
giving the chance the administration to work through that, and
I'd like to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that and add, in particular, an emphasis on how we utilize Salesforce and how the public interacts with Salesforce, both input and output, because I have continuously received complaints that in our own cloud system, we insert complaints from my SLC or my SLC mobile app, and that there is no output back to our constituency, which is very concerning to me. So please include that.
In fact, my constituents say that it's marked resolved long before they've seen a resolution to what they reported.
Correct. So we know that the outputs are not being, there's something going on there. I'd like to know.
Yeah, and actually, there's a work group working on that. And I think the other thing you've mentioned in other cases was how that data can be tapped and used to identify trends and stuff, right?
Thank you. Before I move on to the next piece of business is going through all the legislative intents in the Unresolved Issues staff report. But before I move on to that, I just wanted to recognize that Councilmember Dugan has joined. So he is here, and I don't know if he wants to unmute and comment on any of the things, but feel free.
I'm okay with discussion. I'll just listen at this point.
Thank you. All right. So now going to Unresolved Issues staff report on page 6. And the reason I'm sharing the screen is just so that the council can see and public can see the actual wording of the legislative intents. Obviously, the final wording is entirely up to the council, and so we can keep editing as long as you'd like before the adoption, which makes it final. Okay, so the first legislative intent relates to establishing some more specific goals for the administration's forthcoming zero-based budgeting exercise. There were several ideas that were raised that seemed to fit within, or that would seem to benefit from a specific lens within that exercise. So the first being resources in the Public Lands Department. And so this would request within the zero-based budgeting exercise for information to be focused on balancing resources that are spent on deferred maintenance, regular maintenance like mowing and weeding, and new projects. And so the goal would be that the council would have this information for the next budget cycle and could, make determinations based on, are we putting our resources in the right way? And feel free to jump in if there's any concerns with the wording or concept.
On these, what's the process? Do we need to straw poll them to formally adopt them as a legislative intent? Do they?
It would help to straw poll if you're interested in it as a legislative intent. We've just been collecting ideas as of now, and so because we're honing in on the final budget adoption, we don't want to include a legislative intent if the council's not interested in it, or if you've asked it the question and it's been answered and you're not.
So let's track interest in this one before we move on. Does anyone have a question? Do we feel ready to take a straw poll? Do we need discussion before that? Then someone who isn't the chair, want to call for a straw poll?
Chair, I would motion for a straw poll for the items listed for research and legislative intent.
For the 1A, for balancing resources?
1A. Did we want to do all of them or just 1A?
No, let's just do one at a
Okay,
time to
sorry.
make sure that
Then
we...
for 1A.
Okay.
Second, or wait.
That's an
looks like-
affirmative. That's an affirmative.
Mono and Dugan, can we see how you
Yes.
feel? Okay.
Dugan.
Okay, so that is 6 in the affirmative with Young absent.
Okay. The next in this category would be evaluating expenditures for public safety alternative response models. So again, looking at it across departments about how the city expenditures come in that. It'd be more of an informational, again, providing council information for next budget cycle. We do have a separate standalone legislative intent about this, so I think if you adopt this version of it, we could potentially eliminate the standalone version of it.
Council, any questions, discussion on it?
No, I propose a straw poll that we include that as a legislative intent, evaluating expenditures for public safety program. Alternative
hang on.
response models.
Do we want to limit this to just public safety, or the park rangers were at one point as well an alternative response model? Do we want to include them even though they're not in the public safety department? And are downtown ambassadors considered public safety, or they're housed elsewhere? Are they?
We could clarify that it should include park rangers and downtown ambassadors. We could just include those.
Let's include them.
And should we include HART and rapid intervention as well?
Yes.
I mean, aren't they all included in anything that's?
I just want to make sure public safety doesn't eliminate any of those, and we're not just looking at MRT.
It depends on who you ask. That there are several people who consider the downtown ambassadors as part of public safety, but I think it never doesn't hurt to clarify it.
Okay, sorry. I should have clarified that before you called for the straw poll.
Okay, so I propose that we add this legislative intent and clarify that we're including downtown ambassadors, park rangers. I mean, I would include in that anybody that is considered part of the alternative response programs that we've since 2020.
Okay. All right.
Online, show us your.
Yes.
Great.
All right, that is 6 affirmative with Young absent.
The next item is vacancy analysis, and this was something that I think the administration was planning on doing anyway, in terms of evaluating why departments were dropping so much to fund balance. And so several of the reasons that that money is dropped to fund balance is that hiring takes longer, or maybe the realization is that the position is needed maybe somewhere different than where it was funded. And so this would ask the administration to focus on all vacancies, all FTE vacancies in each department, to evaluate for efficiencies. It's likely something that would have happened anyway with a zero-based budgeting exercise, but I think anytime the council can state their policy goal, it helps the administration know where to focus their efforts.
Any discussion on this?
I see a thumbs up from Councilmember Dugan.
Okay, I motion that we do a straw poll for legislative intent for item C.
Okay,
everyone?
Great.
Councilmember Mono?
I saw a thumbs up briefly from him.
Okay, and then I saw one from Dugan. All right, that's 6 in the affirmative with Young absent.
Great. The next is, it's actually a holdover from a discussion that occurred during the budget amendment, which is to evaluate the compensation plan for appointed versus merit employees, and then clarifying that department deputy directors are also appointed employees, with the exception of certain positions. This is more of a technical, logistical kind of interest that has been percolating, but we didn't know if it rose to the level of legislative intent or if it just should be staff follow-up.
Any discussion on this?
Chair, I'd move for straw poll for items 2 to be included in the legislative intent.
Everyone show your feelings. That's 6 affirmative with Young absent.
Great. The next was raised, I believe, during the public services discussion about evaluating charging stations for electric vehicles and studying options for eliminating free charging and shifting them to a paid service.
Any discussion? This would happen before I go electric.
Just go pedestrian. You don't have to worry about EV.
You're on your own, kids.
As much as I don't want this to happen, I'm supportive of the legislative intent.
This was mine, and I drive the EV car, so I'm supportive.
I also drive an EV car, and I will support it, even though I don't want it.
Chair, I'd move that we do a straw poll for the to include item 3 as a legislative intent.
Council? I've got 5 in the affirmative with Wharton in the negative and Young absent.
I also drive an electric car for purposes of disclosure, but yeah.
Okay. The next item is asking the administration to provide a comprehensive briefing for the council on the city's approach to noise enforcement. And there are several kind of sub-bullet points that have come up in different conversations as a way that conversation could be structured.
Council, any discussion?
I propose that we add this legislative intent, and I want to make sure that we can make sure that it's included.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't want this to be focused on just ambient noise. This is meant to target very specific. There's nothing that says the University of Utah noise, but maybe noise around arenas and or event spaces would help clarify.
Gathering, right?
Sorry?
It says mass gathering. Wouldn't that?
I could add.
I just want to make sure it does.
In F, I could add proactive work with any mass gathering or event spaces.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
I see
any
thumbs up. I see a thumbs up from council
there's
members Dugan and
6
Mono.
6 in the affirmative with Young absent.
The next item was based on a straw poll about signs on Tuesday that you request a future policy discussion with the administration about how to broaden the city's ability to respond to requests for neighborhood marking signs, including requests for historic district street signs.
I just want to clarify, this is about historic street signs that are based on neighborhoods, not based on historic markers for historic events.
Got it.
Because in my mind, the street signs that we're talking about for the Yellowcrest neighborhood are completely different than the ones that we allocated CIP money for in the past.
Yes, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And so I have edited that title to say neighborhood district signs.
Yeah,
Is that more accurate?
Okay. Yeah, that would be better.
And I think we were sort of also combining them with the neighborhood identity signs, where Sugar House raised money to put Sugar House signs in, and Rose Park raised money to, So do you want them combined still? Or do you want... Okay.
Yeah. Neighborhood placemaking, and yes.
Okay, great.
I'm in favor.
All right.
Okay.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
I'm have a couple questions on this. So the intent is that we're asking the administration to broaden the city's ability to respond to requests. I'm not sure I understand the intent of that. Is that so that more neighbors have a program to come to us and request us to put signs up, or is it that the neighbors are willing to fundraise for their own signs and they just need city permission to put the signs up?
I think, and
because that is how I'll vote on this.
Yep. I think, and anyone feel free to jump in. What I heard in the conversation on Tuesday was that rather than fund a one-off request each time a group of neighborhoods gets together and requests money from the city, whether through CIP or whether through just direct appropriation from the council, it did not feel as equitable because certain CIP applications weren't granted because of the competitive nature of the CIP process, and whereas other one-off requests were granted. And so having some sort of more equitable way for the city to respond to requests, I don't know what that looks like necessarily, that it might even result in needing a budget, like a pool of funds that could be used. But that's what I heard. I don't know if that's what other people heard.
I mean, that's even better than what I could have thought. But yes, that it really is about finding a process for this, so we don't have this request in a competitive pool, and also random requests from neighborhoods, legitimate good requests, so we can actually have a plan as a city to maybe address this need.
I guess I just don't see it as a big enough need that, given all the other things that the city needs to be focused on and the more urgent things that I feel like we need to put effort into creating a new program for. So I won't be supporting this, but thanks for the clarification.
And thanks for that clarification or that explanation, Jennifer. I fully agree with that, and I appreciate that explanation.
Could I call for a straw poll on number 5 to support the neighborhood district signs, the discussion of it, and
We've got mono in the negative, 4 in the affirmative, and I agree. This is one of those that if there's time, I would like us to give to it, but I don't know how high a priority it rises.
Yeah, I'll give that caveat too. This is, and I say that as somebody that, you know, has residents that have tried to raise this before. I don't want to eliminate the ability of residents to do that, especially if they want to raise funds for it, but this is not a high priority for me.
Yeah, but I think a policy for it, especially as we grow, is smart.
So I'm okay with it with that caveat.
Okay. All right, with that caveat, I'll vote yes. So that'll be 5 in the affirmative, mono in the negative, and Young absent.
Great. Number 6 came up during the discussion of the consolidated fee schedule, and it's asking the administration to evaluate several specific areas of the consolidated fee schedule, and using the council's conversation to inform those. So sidewalk and lane closure fees, reducing business license fees for push carts and other mobile vendors, and then providing 100% of forgiveness for city playing field fees for youth development teams in return for sweat equity at these locations.
There might have been one more thing, and that is for the council to routinely receive the information that tells what percentage of fees is being recovered for each category, so that if the council has a policy approach on a particular thing and they would like to increase the fees, they know how much room they have to do that within the legal limits. So
Sorry,
that's
for
a
the
report.
youth fees?
So this is for all fees, yeah.
Okay.
And Mary Beth was saying that she does a report annually on that, and so if that could be provided with the budget. So, for example, if there's something you want to encourage, you might only want to charge 50% of the fully loaded cost. If there's something you want to discourage, you might want to charge 100% of the fully loaded cost. You have that policy discretion.
Got it.
But if you don't need that, ignore me. Say so.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask for some clarification? And maybe I'm just not following along as well as I need to. Where are we at on the boarded building fees? Did we decide where we want that to be? And are we adopting that with this budget? I was hoping to get some input at our public hearing on Tuesday about that from people who are a little closer to this issue than I am.
So,
and we didn't get any comments, so I'm feeling a little bit of a loss.
yes, that is actually moving on a different track than the budget. It's a little confusing because we started talking about it during the budget, but Title 18 is where those fees are discussed. So the consolidated fee schedule that you're adopting in conjunction with the budget does not yet reflect those boarded building fees. Those will be,
Okay.
I think planning needs another month or two. I could check in with Nick, but I think they needed another month or two to do some of the follow-up work that the council requested in that briefing.
But we did have a public hearing on Title 18
Yes.
on Tuesday, didn't we?
Yes.
Okay. And I made a mistake. I should have motioned for that public hearing to be continued. If it's possible for us to schedule a second one or continue the public discussion about the boarded building fees once we have that more information from planning, I'd like to do that. But understanding that that's not part of this budget, then I'm supportive of this legislative intent.
Okay, so we'll put that request on the chair vice chair agenda. I think that the changes that the administration is bringing back based on council request are significant enough that it might work out well to have a second public hearing. So we'll just put that on the request, go from there.
Okay.
Oh, I wanted to say also, we scheduled that public hearing more quickly than we usually do, so that's why it feels a little off.
Okay. So with that, does the council have any other questions or wordsmithing on
The
this?
straw poll I'll propose a straw poll that we support legislative intent number 6.
Council?
Okay.
6 in the affirmative with Young absent.
The next two are new legislative intents that were raised today. And I'll go over the first one. Relates to a conversation that was started during the straw polls that were taken Tuesday about water quality along the Jordan River. This would ask sustainability to facilitate discussions among sorry, I should have said Salt Lake City departments such as public utilities and other state agencies such as the Department of Water Quality to evaluate what the best approach is regarding water quality and the Jordan River. This wording was put together very quickly this morning, so if you have a way to improve it, I welcome any ideas.
Councilmember Pui, and then we'll go to Mono.
I would love to. This is an attempt to address many of the thoughts from many of you from the council, and trying to understand the different boundaries between agencies, understand the different jurisdictions that touch the river. So it's basically to try to move a little bit the needle on that and to get clarification on that. So it doesn't require any money. I'm not asking for studying anything, just a little direction so we can actually understand the boundaries of this.
I actually find this one to be really important because as we talked about how many different policy areas it impacts, and it also will shape our activities and advocacy in the newly created Fair Park District as well pretty heavily. So.
And I see Director Laura Briefer turned her camera on, and I think Councilmember Mono also had.
Yeah, Councilmember Mono.
Yeah, I also saw that Laura Briefer turned her camera on. I'm happy to hold my comment until after we hear that because I know that her camera doesn't turn on unless it's important.
Yes, I only turn my camera on when it's important. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on here. I'm actually in the middle of preparing a response to a question from Lehua about the jurisdictional responsibilities related to water quality in the Jordan River, and wanted to just make sure that there's a broad understanding that public utilities on behalf of Salt Lake City has jurisdictional obligations under the Clean Water Act, and we're regulated by the Division of Water Quality with the State Department of Environmental Quality to carry out what's called our MS4 permit. That's the Municipal Storm Sewer System permit that regulates everything we do in the city, whether it's construction runoff or sanitation issues or, you know, anything that runs off through the city is our responsibility, and we're obligated and audited on that responsibility. So I just wanted to make sure that that context is known. And the Jordan River has a regulatory requirement on it related to E. coli, and there have been a lot of assessments and monitoring. And right now it's under Public Utilities MS4 permit on behalf of the city to address the E. coli issue in the Jordan River, at least the reaches of the Jordan River that run through Salt Lake City. So just wanted to make sure you understood the where the regulatory responsibility relies for Salt Lake City in this legislative intent.
Thank you. Councilmember Romano?
Well, that helps. And what I was going, so what Director Briefer just said, I appreciate that. What I was going to say was that I appreciate us taking a second to look at this. I felt like the funding allocation, I wasn't quite sure where it was. And if it was our responsibility or not, sounds like from what Director Briefer said, that maybe it is more our responsibility as a city than I realized. But what I was going to say is that I'm supportive of this legislative intent language. I would even be supportive of saying, adding something to the effect of pending, like, sorry, I'm nervous because Jennifer's typing as I'm writing. But,
I won't type.
pending the result of these discussions, the Salt Lake City Council is supportive or will consider funding requests that would help in this. Because it's not that I'm opposed to funding it. I just want to know that our funding is going the right direction, and I didn't feel like I had that on Tuesday. But once I know, like, this is where the gap is and this is what we need, I'm totally open to considering that funding request. So I wouldn't be opposed to putting that additional language in that just signals that we are open to considering that if other council members are supportive.
I will be. I mean, I started with a request of money, so so yes, I will be supportive of that if my colleagues also support it. So I would like to suggest a straw poll on number 7, water quality.
Council? We've got 6 in the affirmative with Young absent.
Okay. And then this next one was raised today, but I'll leave that to maybe Councilmember Pui to introduce. This was just language provided to staff today, so.
Yeah, this is a legislative intent, and I share this intent with all of you, is to basically start the discussions for this council to address the council compensation and involving the CCAC, the HR, and the council staff to collaborate and evaluate the compensation of the council. I also want us to evaluate term limits and potential semi-annual evaluation on council compensation for the future. So to codify those things. And I would love to include all elected officials for our city and to create a process that is transparent for all of us, and so we can have these conversations in public. So yeah.
And on this particular one, because it's new, and actually the last one as well, there's not necessarily a need to straw poll that today. What we'll do is we'll keep it in the unresolved issues staff report so that it's in packets over the weekend. Adjusting legislative intent language is on the day of adoption is simpler than adjusting budget numbers on the day of adoption, and so the council can discuss it further on Tuesday.
Council, any additional conversation?
just have a question.
Well, it sounds like
Wharton, then Mono, please.
I have a question about what's meant by semi-annual evaluation.
Is basically to codify when this body will evaluate their compensation. So do it every 2 years to codify this conversation.
But it also says potentially codifying the timing for future consideration of adjustments.
It's both. They're both the same thing. So we can work on that language.
Okay.
Councilmember Mono?
It sounds like we're wanting to have more discussion on this on Tuesday, which I look forward to doing. One thing that I'll just put out there as a thought is that I know that there's something in our city charter about whether city council is full-time or part-time, and that needs to go to a vote of the public. I actually think we should have that discussion about whether we bring that to the public to vote on or not. But I don't know where I am on that, but I think that should at least be on the table.
You want to discuss that on Tuesday?
Well, I feel like if we're going to discuss this legislative intent on Tuesday, I know we're waiting because we don't have a full body of the council here today to get really deep into this conversation on Tuesday. But if that's when we're going to have this conversation, I think that should be part of the conversation as well, personally.
I mean, I guess I'm open to having that conversation at some point, but given that we're pressed for time on the budget, and that I don't know that that's a budget that's going to be addressed by the current budget, then I would want to have that big of a conversation separately and not when we're pressed for time.
And I'm okay with that as well. I just thought that what I heard from Jennifer was that we're going to wait until Tuesday to discuss this because legislative intent language was easier to change on the day of adoption than actual budget numbers. But if we're not going to be discussing the language of that until a future date, because we also don't have to adopt legislative intents on budget night, if I'm understanding correctly, we can do that at any point. So I just at whatever point we have the discussion about it, I'd like that to be included. But if the timing of that, I'm agnostic to.
I would like us to stick to the language.
I think it's a semantic that there's a misunderstanding. Yes. We're going to rediscuss the legislative intent on Tuesday when we have a more complete council. The intention of the legislative intent is to have a much more full conversation outside of the context of the budget season to arrive at our conclusions regarding processes.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah, and that is the whole intent of that language. So I want to make sure that.
So they're both correct, and yeah.
Yeah, and it took quite a bit of work to get to that language between.
I appreciate you giving so much sweat to this, Councilmember Pui. You've really done an amazing job getting this to this point. Any other discussion? All right, Council. No one has proposed. Has anyone proposed the straw poll?
We don't need to necessarily straw poll that
one. We're not straw polling this one. Sorry.
The next one was just evaluating the efficiencies of diversified response teams. I think that we can remove that based on it being included in the zero-based budgeting exercise. And then if the council would like these contingent appropriations, they can be added to the ordinance. Let me share my screen again really quick. The first one is, and actually these two contingencies are actually carryover contingencies from previous years. The first one is relating to Foothill Trails constructions. We have received a transmittal on that, but we just, given the budget season and timing on the agenda, there hasn't necessarily been time to dig into it and evaluate whether the contingency has been met. So out of an abundance of caution, you could include the contingency again for this coming fiscal year and determine if it's been met when you receive that briefing, probably in July. And the only reason we need you to straw poll these is that this will tell us what needs to be put in the budget ordinance, because these actually, the wording of these actually goes in the budget adoption ordinance itself.
Council? Any discussion? Anyone want to call a straw poll?
Or we can eliminate it.
Yeah, you want to get rid of it?
I don't want to get rid of it don't know what changes I want to make right now.
Okay. This one, the editing of contingent appropriations is a little more complicated just because it's wording that needs to go into the ordinance. What do you think, Cindy, in terms of timing?
I mean, we could probably get it with you tomorrow on it. And one part to remember is just that it can be fairly general, and then once you guys release the funds, then you get rid of that, so you can eliminate it easily.
I will send you the language and then let me know. And I guess maybe it would help to know if the rest of the council is comfortable with deferring to Councilmember Wharton in terms of the wording of the contingency.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with deferring to Councilmember Wharton on the wording, because I want to make sure that our trails get funded and that we start moving out on the trail maintenance and the trail building. So I don't want to have to wait for another budget amendment. So, but I will defer, and I'm comfortable with Councilmember Wharton looking at the wording.
I will like to see the language before I commit to anything. I certainly is an issue that I would like to support. That but the words are important here. So I would love to see what you work through.
All right, so we're not going to straw poll this.
Okay. The next item is a continued contingency from previous years that outlines expectations for funding our future. I think that over the years, while funding our future has been implemented, it's gone very well, and the administration has followed all of these. But this is just a belt and suspenders kind of thing that we include every year in terms of the council's expectations about how funding our future funds are tracked and managed and spent. Is the council okay including this language again?
Council, any feedback?
I'm supportive of this language.
Okay, I got a thumbs up from Councilmember Dugan, thumbs up from Councilmember Mono. Okay.
Right, so it's
great.
6 in the affirmative, Young absent.
Awesome. And that is it. Yay.
Is that really it?
I want to acknowledge how much work you guys have been doing, and this is why I appreciate the staff telling me and telling us when we are making your lives miserable, and it really is not my intent, even though that I do that all the time. But thank you to all of you for all the work, and thank you for the impact that you guys make in this city. So.
I want to amplify that and add on that the same staff that is helping us do, no matter what the public narrative is, no matter what the headline is, the amount of due diligence going on regarding all of the developments that are before us, the NHL development, all of it, the same people who are doing this budget are the people who are navigating this. There is no qualification for what sort of full-time that is. There's no qualification for the emotional labor that requires, as we all tend to care about where we live. It's not just a clinical dry job to us. So yes, not only are you doing the work in multiple places, you're keeping us straight as we attempt to alongside you. And it's Herculean, and there is no compensation that we could come up with to say thank you. But you are all remarkable, and I'm incredibly thankful for each of you too.
While we're sharing gratitude, I'll say that working with the administration this year through the budget has been so incredibly helpful. The department directors have been incredibly responsive on all of the council members' questions, and without that responsiveness, none of this, we can't adopt a good budget. So thanks to the administration too.
So can I ask a question going back to the top of this sheet? Because it's different. It doesn't have. It's got the 783,000 in red, and then the one that you showed us had us in the red under funding our future. And I'm just
she added the 500,000
because
we added the 500,000 holding account for the Jordan River.
But I thought that came out of
funding our future. So what I would do essentially to have that be balanced is you would spend, unless property tax money comes in super sufficient, you would spend money out of funding our future fund balance. So, you know, this would be here. And then that would be balanced essentially. Does that make sense? So you'd spend money out of.
But we'd still be 783,000 from general fund.
General fund balance, right?
And then that would put general fund at
right now you're 1.8 million over 13%, so that would put you at about $1 million over 13%.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can when we get our final numbers, I'll make sure to have those exact percentages figured out, so that you guys understand exactly where you're finishing the budget year.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask my co-counselors, we had discussed earlier in the year the difference between just having a generous general fund balance and actually having the rainy day fund crisis savings. I still think this is really important and something that we can't do in one fell swoop, but we should be building over time. I'd love to know where you all are on that. Am I still like the only one on the council who feels that's something that we should be moving towards? I'm at peace. I've been the oddball out before. If Mano?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused because I thought we had a limit to how high our fund balance can go. If we just put it in a different account, does that take that limit away? Or are you just proposing that our 13% goal goes up to like 15% or something?
It's the difference between having a lot of money in your checking account and knowing that it's going to roll over month to month, and like actually having the savings account to put the down payment on your car.
But I don't know, are we legally allowed to do that, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, the finance department has been looking into those options. I think that the practical challenge we have in this particular year, Council Chair, is that because we're using fund balance to balance the budget, there's actually not that much of a cushion to put into a separate.
I just want to make sure that we're keeping the conversation front and center, and I'm understanding where we are, because it feels pretty important to me that we start gearing our thinking in this way if it's something that any number of us, you know, at least three of us find important.
I mean, it's
Who
do you want it?
Let's go Pui.
Certainly this is a topic that I'm interested in discussing, but certainly I'm not ready to make a decision until we know a little more. And I would like the city to be safe, but at the same time not to play it, you know, too safe and keep money that we could be leveraging. The value of money loses its impact with time, and the cost of doing major changes and improvements also diminishes with time. So, but this is an important conversation to have. I would love to put a pin on it and hopefully address it strategically as a body, with obviously the smart people from the administration to help us through this.
Okay. Councilmember Dugan?
Yes, thank you. We've had this discussion in prior years, and we went from 10% to 13% on the fund balance because of those same concerns. And so I appreciate the conversation, and I think we should continue to have this conversation and continue to make sure that this is in the forefront of our decisions. But I also need to point out that we used a lot of money from fund balance in this previous two cycles, and I see more coming into our fund balance. So I'm not too, I'm confident that we're going to have enough for that rainy day fund. And I think the 13% is set there for a minimum because of just this conversation as we're having right now. So I'm looking forward to more conversations, but I think 13% is the minimum, and that's a good level to stay at. And we don't need to be at 20 to 25% because I think then we're holding back money that we could actually be spending it for a good cause.
Okay. Anyone else?
Madam Chair.
Yes,
My
Councilmember.
thoughts are maybe a little bit all over the place. I think I resonate with a lot of the comments that have been said. I don't want to go so far into creating the rainy day fund that we are squirreling away money that could be used for things that are needed right now, like deferred maintenance. I think catching up on deferred maintenance is equally important to saving for a rainy day, because it really is. It's sort of, to me, it's like a similar future proofing of the city. I would be open to considering like going to a higher percentage as our goal, above 13%. I would be open to considering an entirely separate fund that's in a separate account that we hold for like true emergencies, and defining what a true emergency is. I wouldn't be interested in funding that separate account through reductions in our annual budget. I would be more interested in funding that account through any funds that drop to fund balance at the end of the year, so vacancy savings and things like that. We have quite a bit of that that's happened in the last few years, and I know we have a legislative intent to try and reduce that, or to try and understand that a little bit better. But to me, that money is money that we budgeted but we didn't use, and that would be the ideal money to be put into that rainy day fund, as opposed to what we've been doing is using it for capital improvements, which I also love. But I could be convinced that let's not go as hard on the capital improvements, and let's put a little bit of money into that rainy day fund. But I don't think I'm interested in like reducing our level of service in order to save more beyond our 13, or if we go to 15 or whatever that is. So it would be how we're funding that rainy day fund, I think, that is important to me. Because I don't want residents now to suffer a reduction in service level in order to get that. But I would see something like funds dropping to fund balance being used for that.
That's close to where I am. Because I mean, yeah, that's a priority for me too in principle, but I also stand by all of the straw polls that I just made to spend this money. And so I don't feel like I can say that, I mean, those are conflicting priorities. So I would say, yeah, if we can take things that are dropping back to fund balance, or, you know, money that comes in over and above what we projected on sales tax, things like that, we put it aside. But I don't want to undo the votes that we just, or the polls that we just did.
To be clear, that's not at all I was asking.
Okay, I guess I'm confused then, because I don't know.
It's more of a thermometer on the concept and where we should be aiming as we move forward through things.
So
pending our federal landscape could be completely different at this time next year. Mm-hmm. And there are some priorities that I know in the city we want to defend, you know, so having rainy day funds could function on multiple axes that we qualify as emergencies, you know, in my estimation. So, all right, thank you for humoring me and giving feedback on that.
Thank you so much, Council, for working through a boatload of the unresolved issues. So you've really set us up for success in adopting on Tuesday. So we appreciate that. Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Okay, we will turn our attention now to the capital improvement program. Ben Lutke is going to stay at the table with us, council policy analyst, and we'll invite Aaron Price, Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Mike Atkinson, Capital Asset Planning Manager, and Rachel Molinari, the Capital Improvement Program Manager, to the table. I'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks. I want to remind the council there were 2 CIP books. The one that you want to work with says including capital maintenance funding. That's the $15 million holding account that you approved in budget amendment number 5 and is recommended to be funded. You want to make sure you're using this version to have those recommendations. And it is posted online if you prefer a PDF version. The council approves the overall funding for CIP as part of the annual budget adoption vote in June, so this will be next Tuesday. You also approve the debt obligations. These are payments on existing bonds. And there are a few ongoing obligations, such as payments on properties that are leased by the city that are approved with the debt obligations. Over the summer, the other ongoing obligations and the new project funding, those are all considered together in your July and August deliberations. Per state law, the capital projects budget, those project-specific funding, needs to be determined and adopted by September 1st. Can we actually switch from the administration's presentation to the staff report? Page 2 has a funding sources comparison table I'd like to show. That's the one. This takes a look at the last 3 years of general fund CIP and the fiscal year 2025 proposed CIP. And if you look at the bottom 2 rows, there are 2 different columns. One is the grand total, and then the one at the very bottom is the total without one-time funding. So this is looking at the ongoing funding for CIP. And note that CIP for enterprise funds is separate. So this doesn't include the airport, public utilities, golf, the RDA. The grand total column is $58.1 million, which includes the $15 million from the capital maintenance holding account. This would be 43% more than last year, and it would be equivalent to 10.8% of ongoing general fund revenues. In a typical year, we are closer to 7%, so 10.8%, this is the highest I've ever seen. The city has reached 9% recently, but 10.8, that is a significant increase, and I wanted to highlight that because capital maintenance funding has been a goal of the council for this next annual budget. The city is also implementing the 2022 sales tax revenue bond projects, those $67.5 million, as well as the first issuance of the Parks, Trails, and Open Space bond. That was $24.6 million that you approved last October. So while this is a large amount of annual CIP funding, we're also still implementing those 2 bond-funded projects. The bottom row, the total without one-time funding, $41.6 million. That is about average for what we've seen the last several years in terms of ongoing funding. So we take a look at both of those each year. In the center, there is a pending amount for repurposing old CIP accounts. Staff is working with the administration to review projects older than 3 years. In the CIP policies adopted by the council, the goal is from the time of appropriation, the project should be completed 3 years later. So every year as part of the annual budget, we review the appropriations older than 3 years to see if they're completed under budget, or occasionally the project was reduced in scope or is just not proceeding. So we hope to have those amounts for you possibly tomorrow, and it'll be available for your discussion next Tuesday. I'm going to keep going. Can we go to the next page, page 3? There are 3 separate tables that compare the funding recommendations from the Resident Advisory Board, the CDCIP board, and the mayor. Most of these differences relate to the $15 million capital maintenance holding account because that was approved by the council after the board had completed their deliberations. This first table has 6 projects that were already recommended for funding by the advisory board, and the mayor's recommendations are to add additional funding on top of what the board recommended. So The column on the right side gives you the total of the two. And all of these will be included in your July and August deliberations. I just wanted to call out those differences. Can we go to the next page for the next table? This one shows 7 projects that were not recommended for funding by the board, and the mayor is recommending funding for them. And then the one below that is only 2 projects, but the recommendation is to swap out funding from the county quarter cent sales tax for transportation and the capital maintenance holding account for 2 projects. It's the 400 South Bridge over the Jordan River rebuild and designing a section of the Green Loop. Can we scroll down a little bit? And I do want to point out that $4 million for the bridge rebuild is not enough to fully fund it. Engineering does have some prior year appropriations. We did receive as a city several $1 million to rebuild 3 other bridges over the Jordan River. We are unlikely to receive additional federal funding from that bridge formula program that was authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The amount that we received is approximately appropriate to the city's population compared to the state, and that's one of the proxy measures that UDOT has used for awarding funding. Can we jump to page 6? One more chart to show you. This is the number of projects requested. You can see in blue the requests from constituents, either individuals or community councils or other community organizations, and in orange, the requests from internal city departments. The total amount is 72 requests, and looking back over the last almost decade, this is a little bit above average for what we've seen. Of course, not every application is equal. Some are much larger or more complex than others, but each application does go through the entire process and has its own workload. I'll pause there and turn it over to Aaron and the CIP team.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm actually going to turn it over to Mike and Rachel for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Molinari, the Capital Improvement Program Manager. Thanks for the opportunity to present this today. Yep. Great, if we can go to the next slide. This is the FY25 map. This is a public-facing map that shows all of the applications that we received this year. It's a good bird's eye view of everything if you're more a visual person. The link is provided there. Next slide. Like Ben mentioned, we received 72 applications this year. 32 of those were internal, 40 of those were constituents. The total requested funding was $90 million. Within the mayor's recommended budget, 31 projects are recommended, and that total is $41 million. Of that, there are 9 constituent projects recommended, totaling $2.8 million. And then to the right is the division and department breakdown of the requests. Next slide. This goes into the details of the constituent applications. There was about 18 million in requests. We've broken out the requests by dollar amount per council district. So we have 1 through 7, and then the citywide encompasses multiple districts, or if it was just generally a citywide project. And then to the right is the dollar amount breakdown by division or department for the constituent requests. Next slide. this is now the breakdown for the internal. They're requested about $72 million. You can see the majority of those were citywide projects, and then again the breakdown of division and department by the funding requested in the pie chart. Next slide.
I'm Mike Atkinson, Capital Asset Planning Manager. These are the ongoing expenses, approximately $16 million and $10 million, $11 million to debt service. And a few of the changes on there to note would be the $560,000 from city leases is being brought over from CAN operational budget into CIP. And the public maintenance, the public lands maintenance funding our future is being brought over from operational. And there's a $1.5 million that is a one-time for the city landfill. Next slide, please.
I just want to add on the landfill that it's a revolving fund, so we get reimbursed for those expenses, but we do need the budget in order to make the expenses and get the reimbursement later.
Thank you. The available funding, we had approximately $58 million in available funds. The recommendations fully use those from the different funding sources, which includes the capital maintenance of $15 million. The part that was unable to be used at this time was the parks impact fees of $16 million, which was due to eligibility of projects with matches. Next slide, please.
And here we have the mayor's recommendations. It's broken out by council district, and then constituent versus internal. So you can see the majority are citywide projects and internal projects. Next slide. This is just an overview of the projects that are recommended, and it's sorted from the board's highest score to the lowest. The mayor's recommendations mimic the board's recommendations, with, like Ben mentioned, the exception of that $15 million wasn't in play at the time of their decision. Next slide. This is the continuation of that slide. Just list all the projects. And then the last two are mayor added projects for historical signs and markers and concrete replacement. Next slide.
The capital asset planning team is requesting an additional FTE to this FTE will be 100% dedicated to impact fees. The funding for this will be requested in a future budget amendment and will be fully paid for with impact fees. And this position is required because of changes by the state auditor and the requirements for the state audit report, which include tracking individual fees you have 6 years to spend impact fees. We'll need to track each individual fee separately on how they're budgeted, when they're spent. It's not just tracking those, but it's also tracking the matching portion of them. And so we're able to report to administration in a timely fashion and then being able to report it to the state auditor. And without this position, we could have additional issues that would require refunding impact fees. Next slide, please. One of the most an important priority for administration is maintaining our existing assets and maintenance for newly acquired assets. And therefore, the Capital Asset Planning Committee is going to review over the next several months, review all unfunded maintenance for the entire general fund, looking at it in a holistic approach and then those will be ranked or evaluated and assessed based on the capital asset planning matrix. And then once those needs are scored and assessed, then the CAP committee will come back to administration and then council with funding options for these maintenance needs. Next slide, please. You've seen this slide previously in public lands presentation. These are new properties that we have required that have some unmet maintenance needs, and these are some that we want to address sooner than later, and we will be coming back with a budget amendment, and budget amendment 1 we'll be reviewing these and presenting a funding option for this in budget amendment 1. Next slide, please. Looking forward, our team has been busy working on integration of Workday. We'll continue our the integration of Workday, working with the various departments and divisions, and specifically the project module. We're also looking to implement a new software over this next fiscal year that will help us maintain our process and help us not rely so much on Excel. Currently, we are reworking all of our, amending our current IFFPs for police, streets, and parks and fire. We are doing them all currently except for streets. We just council approved the funding for that in BA5, and so we'll be working on adding that here in the next month. We'll also be working this summer on some potential changes to advise on Resolution 29. One of those would be a revision to the cost overrun language, which was last set in 2004. And over the last several years, administration been able to rely on that less frequently because the maximum is 100,000, and a lot of the change orders or the extra is well in excess of 100,000. And so we're looking to revise that amount to a higher amount.
On that though, the council put that in place so that they could make decisions based on when projects are changing price significantly, whether that's to reduce the scope or something like that. So when that comes up, that'll be a discussion.
Thank you.
When you say that comes up, is that it comes back to us for a vote in funding to balance that line item as it comes up? Or?
Right now, there's a certain sort of safe harbor where the administration can go ahead and make changes without coming back to the council. And if that amount is to be increased, then that might mean the council would want to take a look at that and evaluate the project. Am I missing something, Mary Beth?
No, I just think that I want to clarify what Mike said. I think that we've worked with Ben on a few areas in Resolution 29. We would like to continue to work with the council in collaboration to bring it, council staff to bring back a few cleanup items.
Then you could have that discussion.
Would this be an example of it with the new properties where I'm looking at the fiscal year prorated unfunded? Would that be part of this resolution acted, or is that one time?
It could. I think that could be part of your resolution, right? This was your resolution that you created, and the reason that you created it was we weren't spending the funding like we should have been, right? So that's where the 3-year came in.
Okay.
That sits inside that resolution, but I think that, you know, from 2004 to now, 20 years later, we've changed things significantly. And I think that we need to work collaboratively and updating that resolution. I think Cindy had a really good point of the 100,000, and that may not want to be changed, but there are areas that I think that if you say, you know what, we want maintenance first, we want capital projects second, that would be the council's choice.
Ben, I'm turning to staff to see, because I'm the least familiar with this resolution. Would you say that, I mean, I'm interested in that, but I don't know if we need to continue to have a policy discussion or not.
It's attachment 1, if you want to take a look. The original resolution was from 2004, and the council did review it and make significant changes in 2017. That took several briefings and discussions, and I imagine it would be a similar process to make changes this time. The specific question about the cost overrun account, there is a formula that the council originally put in the resolution. It has percentages and dollar amounts, and those are both intentional limits, so we would probably want to look at both of those if you want to revisit those.
So it would be scheduled for another day?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's considering the large amount of money and impacts on this, would not want to rush it.
Thank you for that clarification. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you all. Council, any additional questions, concerns? All right. I think you got us at the end of a...
Sorry, I do have one. On the, one of the ones that is the mayor's recommended for funding, but that was not recommended by the CDCIP board for the urgent upgrades to Memory Grove. My understanding from some of the groups that have memorials in Memory Grove is that there were agreements between those groups and the cities about upkeep of those monuments, and I just want to make sure that that we're honoring any of those agreements, because I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why the mayor recommended it, but the CDC board didn't, is that there are these things in place. So I don't need an answer right now, but I know that a lot of those were donated to the city by, you know, either children or widows of people who died in wars, and now that generation of people has also died, and so I want to make sure that we're still upholding the commitment, though, to like maintain those memorials in perpetuity. Thanks. You don't have to answer right now, but you can if you want.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we're doing that. And I know initially this is part of the additional funds that are made available. And I know that was something that wanted to get done. And so when we had the additional funds, that was towards the top of the list, but we'll definitely get you more detail on that.
Madam Chair, I would love to learn more about that and how legally binding those agreements are or not. I also know that we have the International Peace Gardens, and those agreements been made there, and I would like to see if we're going to put $2 million on this. I would like to see what the reasoning was a little more and dig through that, and I think that is an opportunity for us to weigh in on this. But yeah, I would love more information about those agreements. Thank you.
The $1.9 million, it is 9 individual projects, so maintenance and repairs at different places around Memory Grove. And then there's a separate $160,000 to come up with a preservation and maintenance plan long term. Mm-hmm. So I think to your point about what agreements do exist, what funding level is needed, this plan would help answer some of those questions, but we can see what can find before the July briefing.
Yeah, I mean, it is on my mind, given it's the 80th anniversary of D-Day, so I think we should keep that in mind as well. Or I think, yeah, I think we did something from the city recognizing that as well. So I want to make sure that we're like following through on that. Thanks.
If I may, I just wanted to state here, some of these projects too, when we look at unfunded projects, I just want to be able to help show constituents that through CIP, some of their requests might be met still. I'm particularly looking at the street lighting projects. I know that that's something that's been critical for Central 9th, is to see more lighting, better street lighting and activation. You know, I'd love to see, I don't know if we can get this finite into details, but how much of CIP would be proportioned per neighborhood?
We might not be following.
I'm trying to find the specific project. I think you're referencing a specific project. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't want to give the exact line item, but it's the FATE project was not funded. I just wanted to bring it up since this is something that a constituent keeps bringing up for me. Just so that they can see that although some of these projects might not be funded, that there are other, they have been met in CIP.
Mm-hmm. Similar type projects, that's correct.
Right, and so I was asking how much of those, the street lighting in particular, how can we best articulate how much of that is allocated per neighborhood, particularly in the Central 9th neighborhood?
That's a tricky question that I think we probably need to follow up with you on, because the answer might be not that they would get the lights that they hope for.
Sure.
So let us.
It's also the UDOT state property versus city property. There's a couple different tricky bits to this one.
Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. I think a few of them were eager to see and hope to see those changes, and so this helps me articulate to them. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, council.
Carry and do a couple of unresolved issues.
Yes, Jen, do you wanna? Are we asking Jen to come back up?
Yes.
Okay.
We have two items. One we just realized, and the other the administration just asked us about. So we beg your indulgence. I'll get started while Jennifer's plugging in, but the council will recall an innovative approach on 2100 South in the Sugar House area, where the city was looking for a way to not dig up the street after it had been rebuilt. And so the idea was that the city may front some money to include utilities and then charge the property owners later as they develop and apply for permits and things like that. The bids have come in higher than anticipated. The original amount that the council set was not to exceed 7 million. If we're to continue on the same level with the same approach, they would need it changed to not to exceed 10 million. But again, it would be on the same basis that it would be repaid as development takes place in the area. A possible source for this would be the Funding Our Future fund balance. So this is an unusual thing. I don't think of it as like a new expenditure. It's basically facilitating. It costs more than we thought it would to facilitate that approach.
I mean, ultimately, it saves us money, right? Like, because we know how to tear down the street again and re-spend on paving it and making it nice. So, and does the administration need us? Do we need to change the number? And how do we do that?
Logistically, that's why we came back to unresolved issues. So it's not too late to add this money to this annual budget. I think this was a rush. It was added to the last budget amendment, but because that budget amendment is closed, we can't just amend that budget amendment. So we would have to add it to the annual budget. And to Cindy's point, we would add it from funding our future fund balance in the hopes that it is repaid as development happens.
I'm okay with that. So that's 3 million, right? From the fund balance for funding our future. Do you need a straple on that?
I think that's what we would need at this point.
I would like to suggest that we support the 3 million from funding our future with the hopes that we get repaid on that.
Thank you. And Councilmember Mono said yes. Okay.
5 affirmative with Dugan and Young absent.
Okay. And then the one that I realized I neglected to call out specifically, after the mayor's recommended budget was submitted, Public Services and CAN discussed that the engineer 4 position might be more effectively used in CAN, and I would ask anyone to come up and provide more information. I know the surface level information. So you straw polled approving the position, but we didn't explicitly say, are you also okay shifting that position from Public Services to CAN? The 2 department directors have discussed and agreed that that shift makes sense, but because they came to that conclusion after the mayor's budget had already been submitted, they wanted to gauge your temperature, but then also, they're happy to come back in a budget amendment if you'd rather. But since the budget is open and since we haven't adopted the staffing document yet, now would be a good time to make your feelings known on that.
Council, any discussion?
This is budget neutral.
It's budget
right?
neutral. It's just a matter of where that FTE lives in the staffing document, and we would need to know that today so that we can prepare that paperwork.
I personally support this, and if the people that manage and run the city agree that this is the best use, I'm okay with it.
Are we calling the straw poll? That's 5 affirmative with Dugan and Young absent.
Thank you, and sorry I missed.
All right. We have parks here. What are we gonna do?
Can we ask council member? We have some people who need to leave, and we might lose the quorum. And so we weren't sure whether you have time to do the bond report today, or whether you want to do that on Monday.
It's scheduled
Tuesday.
to last 20 minutes according to our agenda. We good to get it done?
So but we're not losing. We're losing some, council members, but we're not losing the quorum, right?
She'll leave in about 25 minutes.
Yeah, by 4:45, I've got to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your flexibility, as we've done yes, we will, no, we won't to you today.
Thank you to our valiant chair who ushers us through the war.
Y'all are just efficient. I'm proud.
Hey, and Latinos are never on time. I just want to say that, because it's true.
Thank you, Council. Now we can go jet skiing on Tuesday instead of coming back. No, I'm kidding. I won't.
Sailing, not jet skiing.
Let me pull up my notes real quick, and then I'll be able to start. All right, thank you for having me. I came previously in December of 2023, and we intend to give at least a semi-annual update on both the sales tax revenue bond projects related to public lands and the 2022 general obligation bond for parks, trails, and open spaces as well. All of the detail on all of the projects is included in an April 2nd transmittal to the City Council. And so today, after I learned a little bit about how long it takes to update all of the roughly 24 projects in December, have decided to offer a shorter, more abridged in-person briefing, but all of the detail in the transmittal. So really just focusing on the projects that have immediate updates, needs, or progress to report on. And I just want to say that just so proud of not only our team in public lands, but our partners in engineering, in finance, and other departments in being able to be so collaborative and visionary in getting these projects done as quickly as we can. I also think it's important to note that many of these projects include not only new assets, but a lot of capital maintenance and asset replacement, especially the reimagined neighborhood parks, Pioneer Park, the cemetery, just to name a few, include a lot of playground replacement, road replacement, irrigation replacement, and are not necessarily, as is the case in Glendale Park and Fleet Block, additions to the asset load and operations and maintenance load of our department. And I think that's a wonderful thing to point out. Next slide, please. This District 3 project in the cemetery will replace irrigation systems and roadways in roughly the northeastern 1/3 of the cemetery. Budget amendment number 5 from this fiscal year included $3 million fronting city money for a state legislative appropriation, which would be reimbursed within the next 2 fiscal years as this project aims to wrap up construction at the end of 2026. Next slide. Pioneer Park in District 4 is currently under design. We are currently at roughly 40% design, but a lot further along than a normal 40%. We intend to construct beginning in 2025, and then we'll be completed in 2026. We've also had great collaboration and unity with the Downtown Alliance, especially of late in recent meetings, reviewing those designs, making sure that they are keeping the market conditions in mind, how this neighborhood is changing, and helping to transform downtown into one of the best neighborhoods in the country. Next slide, please. I'll then talk about the general obligation bond projects that voters approved in November of 2022. 71% of voters voted yes, and the first funding became available in October of 2023 through budget amendment number 2. Next slide, please. Glendale Park in District 2, due to some permitting delays and construction contractor negotiations, we will be beginning construction either this month or next, and construction will last approximately 9 to 10 months. And then the following slides will show you roughly where phase 1 will be, if we can go to the next slide. And then the next 2 slides after this show you renderings of the actual equipment that we have ordered and will be installed as part of this phase 1 improvement. So this is the play feature and part of the playground, and then the next slide is the remainder of the playground, an all ages and abilities playground. Next slide, please. Liberty Park's Rotary Park Playground in District 5. We had a survey open during the entire month of May, and we are pleased to report that we had nearly 1,400 responses to the online survey. We also engaged nearly 100 people in person, including parents and children. They gave us so much good feedback on the 3 design concepts that are on the remaining slides for this project. And we will use all of that feedback to create one final design that will be revealed at the National Ability Center's Inclusion Festival, which will take place at the park on July 18th. So we invite everybody to that event and also to take a look at that final design concept in July. So if we can go to the next 3 slides, show these 3 concepts that were presented to the public in May. There's concept number 1. Next slide. Concept number 2 and concept number 3. And the aim of all of these concepts is to create a truly accessible playground and play area for all ages and abilities. Next slide, please. Fairmont Park in District 7, we're doing a lot of work internally and with our stakeholders and partners and have over the last 6 months to help guide the future of this project. Robust community engagement and concept design work will begin in 2024 with an RFP going out in the next week or two. The construction timeline is still unknown as the city continues to listen, collaborate, and make some key decisions. Next slide. I'm just going to highlight a few of the Reimagine Neighborhood Parks, Trails, and Open Space projects. This is $10.5 million from the bond that again will go towards refreshing, reimagining, and often replacing many of the well-loved but out-of-date assets at many of these parks. So I'm going to highlight just a few today. Next slide, please. Cottonwood Park in District 1 and the Peace Labyrinth in District 2 had separate engagement efforts but done at about the same time. And we recently wrapped up those public engagement efforts and will be publishing a community engagement report within the next week or two. Next slide, please. Toffer Park, as many of you probably know, had a wonderfully successful Kaboom, Delta, and Jazz funded playground replacement just this last Saturday. We had over 200 volunteers who came. Councilmember Lopez Chavez was there. And say that again?
I was melting.
You were melting. It was pretty warm. But knocked out just in a couple of days a complete replacement of that playground. And as of today, I got a phone call about an hour ago, the poured in place surfacing for that playground is now complete and will be cured tomorrow so that all the kiddos can go play this weekend.
I just wanted to say thank you real quick to Ronnie Pacetto, who really led this project and has been such a huge, valuable asset from our city to constituents. Has poured her whole heart and soul into it, and it was such a great surprise to see Delta's donation of $10,000 to help for the completion of this project. So thanks to everybody involved, and thank you so much to your team. It really has defined this neighborhood and helped that community identify with this park all over again.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ronnie is wonderful. Really if I have to speak selfishly, the great donations from those partners mean that the bond funding can go a lot further than it would have otherwise because we don't need to use it to replace the playground, which was very aged. Next slide, please. Jefferson Park will also be getting a new playground this summer, sort of as a kickoff to the design and community engagement that we do for not only the bond-funded improvements to the park, but also a constituent CIP request that was approved last year. And those improvements will be made within the next couple of years. Additionally, even though I don't have slides for them, both Madsen Parks and Ida Cotton Parks, that's District 2 and District 5, their community engagement began June 3rd and will close on July 31st. So we would love everybody's help, not only in spreading the word about the reports that will be published from these periods, but in spreading the word about the opportunities while they're open. Next slide, please. The Jordan River Corridor has what's called an Emerald Ribbon Action Plan going on right now. Public feedback from phases 1 and 2 that we did last year and earlier this year emphasized improvements to the corridor that focused on its natural character and obviously issues of safety, both personal and public. They want it to be a respite from the city because it is truly a gem that cannot be recreated anywhere else in Salt Lake. We are excited to reveal design concepts for the Jordan River Corridor for additional public feedback this summer, and also those concepts will be presented to the City Council in an informational transmittal at the beginning of July, and then in some site walks in the middle of July. The final designs that will be supported by people in Salt Lake will then be implemented starting within the next couple of years, utilizing that first $9 million in GO bond funds. The action plan that I mentioned also includes operations and maintenance recommendations so that we can make this gem and these improvements that we spend the bond funds on shine for many decades to come. And the next slide is my last. Again, we just want to express appreciation and gratitude not only to the council and to the rest of the administration, but to all of our partners and community members who have been so vocal and open and trusting in us, as we've done just a tremendous amount of engagement in finding out what they want and being able to implement that with these bond funds. We know that the tax dollars, the property tax increases, they're not our dollars, they are everybody's, and we take that very seriously so that we can make our parks cleaner, greener, and safer for everybody. We invite everybody to visit both the bond website, which really just redirects to the public lands webpage regarding the bond, and also our main public lands website for more information on these projects and any other projects that we have going on.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Wharton, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a lot. Oh, sorry. This sounds like a lot, and I'm glad to hear that. But I know that we've spent about 30,000, right, so far?
Of the bond funds? More than that now, yes.
Okay. So are there, how have they been able to do all of that with only that amount of money? And then are there barriers to using more of that money?
No, there aren't really barriers. Simply put, with October being when the funding was available, it took several months and continues as we work on some projects to get contracts in place, then to perform the work, then to receive invoices for the work. And so that's why the spending does not appear to be significantly fast, even though that will increase exponentially here. And then obviously once construction starts, construction and those materials are a lot more expensive than just design and engagement, which is kind of the cheapest, but often the most laborious and time-intensive parts of the project. So we anticipate that by the end of 2024 and into 2025, as construction starts on some of these, that the expenditures will increase dramatically.
Okay, and the reason why I'm asking and wondering is that, my understanding is that we have to spend, when we bond within a certain amount of time legally, and I don't know if it impacts like our ability to go for the second, tranche of funding or anything like that. Is there any concern about that?
Yeah, we have been over the last several months talking with the finance department. I wonder if any of them are here, if they would speak to that. But the difference between this bond and, say, the streets reconstruction bond from 2018 is that this is a taxable general obligation bond rather than a tax exempt. So there isn't a strict 3-year spending timeline like there was on that one. Okay. There's a rough guideline that you do want to spend those funds within 3 to 5 years, or else the IRS says, why are you pulling down all of these funds if you're not spending them quick enough? In addition, we are accruing interest on the funds from those issuances that have not yet been spent, but there is no, like there would be in a sales tax or a tax exempt bond, there is no process by which that interest is kind of recovered or lost by the city at some point if we do not spend that.
Okay, and so that helps me understand like what some of the initial barriers were, and it sounds like we're moving past those, but you said that the projects will go forward exponentially faster, so tell me how that works.
Yeah, simply put, design, community engagement, and all of the activities that happen before construction are really only a small percentage of a project's budget, often 10 to 15% of the project budget. So as we're just beginning that phase right now, that's why we're kind of seeing this trickle of expenditures. As we move into construction on many of these projects, those expenditures will go much quicker. In addition, the funding that is required for the design and community engagement contract has to be in place before we have that contract in place. And our designers often function as the construction administration or construction observation consultants as well. And so their work may last anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 or more years, but we have to have that funding in place before we even have them under contract. So the amount that we asked for was the amount that we intend to spend within the next 3 to 5 years. But because the type of work just for the last 8 months or so has been kind of the cheapest kind of work, that's why we're not seeing the big, $1 million, $2 million, $10 million expenditures that we will see in the next couple of months.
Councilmember Pui, did you have a question?
Yeah, it relates to Glendale Regional Park and the delays, and I was under the impression that we had a deadline with impact fees for phase 1 of that money, and in the documents that were presented to us, it says that, and I just did a simple Google search and I found them very quickly. I should have done that yesterday when I was looking at this, but that some of these improvements were going to be completed by the spring of 2024. Here we are almost in summer of 2024 and not yet started. And I will share with you that the community is already losing a little trust that we've been building. So I think that maybe updating the community regularly, and I know that there is a reasoning. You're not doing this on purpose. I wouldn't ever think that. I think that additional communication with the community councils, through social media, praising people about why the delays will be important. Certainly we talked about communications today a lot, about other departments communicating. Certainly, Public Lands has an impressive group of a team helping us communicate. I think that we should probably improve on that. But will you speak about the impact fees and how those are affected? Because that is, or not. So that will be important for my community. Thank you.
Sure. We initially did have an April 2024 deadline from the federal government due to the funding that was used to purchase that land some 20 years ago. That deadline has been extended, and they're comfortable with our now proposed construction wrap-up of phase 1 being in 2025. There aren't any impact fees for this project that are at risk of expiring. The next expiration that we have is in 2026, and those funds that expire or have to be refunded in 2026 are the ones that are being spent by the Glendale project, so we don't see any issue with that. In terms of what the community's perception is, I completely agree that what we had said was that we were going to have it done by April of 2024, and we didn't. We went to the Glendale Neighborhood Council in May to provide them an update once we had a lot more concrete information about what was going to happen and when. And the response that we got was, we're disappointed, but we're grateful that you came and let us know and what the timeline might be. So we continued to communicate with them and with Turner on that issue.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that, and that means a lot. And as we know, so like community councils are important and to communicate some of this, but they're not just exclusive. There's a lot of neighbors that just don't participate in them.
Correct.
So some additional communication
we'll do
media. That. I would love to disseminate it. Try to point that.
Okay.
Out. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, council, despite the odds, despite a late start, despite fears that we might not maintain quorum, we have checked off everything on today's agenda. Report of the chair or vice. What's that?
We are mavericks of adversity, overcoming it.
We do best under pressure, apparently. Report of chair and vice chair. Vice chair, any report? Vice chair? And we're going to take it as a no report. I also have no report. Executive director? No. And we have no closed sessions. We get to go do our other work. So thank you.